Well, welcome everyone today to Demystifying Regenerative Grazing and Soil Health with Dr. Alan Williams. We appreciate everyone being here today. I'm Felicia Bell from the Gulf States Regional Office located in Jackson, Mississippi. We welcome you today to this. This is going to be a wonderful, wonderful workshop. We appreciate you being here. Some few things that we want to go over, just logistical things. One, we want to let you know that you will be recorded. So if you do not want to be on camera and this recording, do go on the NCAT AFTRA YouTube channel. Please keep your video off. So we just want to make sure you understand that it is being recorded, and it will be housed on that particular channel. Also, we want to let you know that our schedule today is from 10 to 12. Then we will have a 1 hour lunch break, and then we will come back and finish up from 1 to 3. So that is the schedule today, 10 to 12, 1 hour lunch break, and then we will proceed from 1 to 3 to close us out. So we will move into a polling before I get into introducing Dr. Williams. We will do our polls first, then we will definitely get into our presentation today. So today you're joining us for Demystifying Regenerative Grazing and Soil Health with Dr. Alan Williams. Dr. Alan Williams is a 6th-generation family farmer and founding partner of Grass-Fed Insights, LLC, Understanding Ag, LLC, and the Soil Health Academy. He has consulted with more than 4,000 farmers and ranchers in the US, Canada, Mexico, South America, and other countries on operations ranging from a few acres to over 1 million acres. Dr. Williams pioneered many of the early regenerative grazing protocols and forage finishing techniques, and now teaches those practices and principles to farmers globally. He is a recovering academic, having served 15 years on the faculty at Louisiana Tech University and Mississippi State University. He holds a BS and MS in animal science from Clemson University and a PhD in livestock genetics from LSU. He has authored more than 400 scientific and popular press articles and is an invited speaker at regional, national, and international conferences and symposia. Dr. Williams and his colleagues specialize in whole farm and ranch planning based on the concept of regenerative agriculture. Their approach creates significant value add and prepares the landowner for multiple enterprise revenue stream opportunities that stack enterprises and acres. This approach allows for enhanced profitability and/or investment value. They routinely conduct workshops and seminars across the US, Canada, and Mexico. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Williams. You can come forward now, and we appreciate you so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much, Felicia. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. And I hope that everyone enjoys our webinar today. We're going to have some pretty incredible information that we will be presenting today. And when we get to the point that we're going to go through a number of case studies, that'll be either later this morning or after lunch. I think there's going to be some things in there that will be incredibly meaningful to each of you and will probably surprise a lot of you, but in a very good way. I will cut off my video feed. We have a limited bandwidth here, so I'll cut off my video feed as I get started in going through the presentations. What I am going to do, I'm going to go through the first presentation this morning and then open it up for a little bit of Q&A so that we can have time to talk about, the first part that I'm going to present to you, and then we'll move forward from there. So this morning, we're going to start with what we call adaptive stewardship, adaptive stewardship. And basically what we mean by that is, I think everyone understands the term stewardship. It means to take care of, to tend, to caress, to essentially love the land and the ecosystems around us, and to care for those, to steward those, because we were given responsibility over these. And it is our responsibility to be good stewards of what we have been blessed with. So adaptive stewardship simply means that, again, we're to tend to what we've been blessed with, but also we are to do it in a way that allows us the latitude to be able to adjust to ever-changing conditions. For any of you that are on this webinar today, you know that our weather is always throwing curveballs at us, that whether it's rainfall or lack thereof, whether it's cold temperatures, hot temperatures, high humidity, whatever the case may be, we've always got something that we're dealing with. And therefore, we've got to learn how to be ultimately adaptive in how we manage our farms and ranches so that we can take advantage of what is going on around us from a biological standpoint, and at the same time work in synchrony with nature and that biology. So just very briefly, a little bit about what we do. We are farmers and ranchers, and that's not just myself, but all of my partners and everybody within Understanding Ag and the Soil Health Academy. We all have a lifetime of deep practical experience, but in my own operation, we farm and ranch in both Mississippi and Alabama. We do a lot of grass finishing and pastured protein production. And for us, it is all about life. That is really the bottom line. And these are some pictures that I took on our farm in Alabama. And we're constantly looking for diversity of life. What are new species that we're seeing, whether they're plant species, insect species, bird species, whatever. And we do that because as we see increasing diversity in those three key species, plants, insects, and birds, we know that we're doing something right. That is a key indicator that our regenerative efforts and our efforts at adaptive stewardship have been fruitful. However, if we're seeing those species decline or decrease, we know the opposite is true. And we've got to take a look at our management practices and what we're doing to try to determine why we're seeing a decrease in these species. Birds, as I mentioned, birds are a key indicator species. And this, we notice this no matter where we are in the world. It absolutely doesn't matter whether we're here in the hot, humid South, if we're in the cold North, if we are in the desert. It doesn't matter. Birds will just absolutely explode in their populations and in the different types of species if we're doing things right. And I'm going to show you some examples of that later. Okay. I'm having an issue here with advancing slides. Oh, there we go. Okay. Sorry about that. We also are doing a lot of pastured pig production. So not only grass-fed beef, but pastured pigs. And one of the things that we have found with pastured pigs is that they are excellent foragers. So every time we turn pastured pigs into a new paddock and we move them daily under a single strand of poly wire, they're very happy to be moved into fresh forage, and they immediately start their foraging practice. So this is a picture of some of our pastured pork that we produce. We typically get our pigs up to about 300, 320 pounds on a live weight basis before we harvest them. And we do want a very high degree of marbling in our pork. We also do a lot of pastured lamb production. We use hair sheep, and the breeds of choice that we're using on our sheep are a cross between the Katahdin and the Australian white. That's working very well for us. And we're also maintaining a purebred flock of Australian whites. So again, you see some pictures of some of our sheep, and we do move our sheep daily as well. Typically, again, just like the cattle and the pigs, under a single strand of polywire. So we try to train all of our livestock species to respect and to move behind just a single strand of polywire. We also do a lot of poultry production. We do a lot of pastured egg production and broiler production. We're running about 8,000 hens, and we are producing, pastured eggs on a fairly large scale and marketing those through various venues, restaurants, grocery stores, direct to consumer, CSAs, and so forth. We also use guardian dogs, not only just with the sheep, but we also use guardian dogs with our chickens. We find that they are highly effective in being able to protect our chickens from both what we call sharp-toothed predators, and that would be things like coyotes and bobcats and fox and raccoon and so forth. But believe it or not, our guardian dogs are also very, very good at protecting our chickens from raptors. We have a lot of bald eagles, hawks, falcons, things like that around our farms. And our guardian dogs do not allow the raptors to take any of the chickens either. They'll notice them either perched in trees or flying overhead. They'll see the shadow and their heads will go up, and they're after that eagle or that hawk or whatever it may be and chasing them away. So we have an extremely low predation rate, so much so that we have now removed all electric net fencing, and we no longer use any electric fencing around our chickens. That we have found that with the guardian dogs, that's no longer needed. This is some of our grass-fed beef. We do target a highly finished end product. We want that product to be USDA choice and prime. And again, these pictures just validate that we are achieving USDA choice and prime to a very high degree. We've worked for 25 years on this in perfecting both the genetics and the epigenetics of our livestock, as well as our grazing methodologies and our soil health. And all of those combined allow us to be able to achieve these very high levels of finish that are pretty common with us today. So in 2019, all of our beef is federally graded. In 2019, we averaged 85% USDA choice and prime, and we're killing every week. And in 2020, we averaged 98% USDA choice and prime. So that's a lot better, frankly, than any feedlot can do. And yet we're achieving this on grass alone with our cattle. Now, I love this quote from Don Campbell, and this is very true with what we're doing in farming and ranching today, and even in our agricultural research. As Nina said, I describe myself as a recovering academic. I spent 15 years in academia and was a tenured full professor when I left academia to go back into private business. And that was in the year 2000. So for the last 21 years, I've been back in private business, but I also still do a lot of research with a consortium of scientists. And so this quote is true no matter whether we're talking about agricultural research or we're talking about actual farming and ranching. If you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. But if you want to make major changes, change the way you see things. And that's our challenge. It really is. We've got to change the way we see things. And if we do that, we will be highly successful with regenerative agriculture and regenerative grazing. Now, this is our definition, the Soil Health Academy and Understanding Ag's definition of regenerative agriculture. It is farming and ranching in synchrony with nature and the four ecosystem processes to repair, rebuild, revitalize, and restore ecosystem function, starting with the life beneath the soil and expanding to life above the soil. And to accomplish this, we use the 6 principles of soil health and the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. And I'm going to go through those this morning for you. So when we talk about adaptive stewardship, we have to realize this first, that nature will humble you. And if you refuse to be humbled, nature will defeat you. Every time. We cannot tame or beat nature. I hear a lot of farmers and ranchers, and again, remember, I've been one my entire life as well, but I've heard farmers and ranchers say this over and over. I am trying to beat nature. I'm out there beating nature. No, you're not. Okay? No matter how many times you say that, you are not beating nature, and you never will. And I think what's happening right now, this year, all the different things across North America are clearly showing us that we are not defeating nature. Rather, nature is determining what's going to happen here. So I love this quote by Wendell Berry. If you don't know who Wendell Berry is, Google him. You need to know Wendell Berry. He's in his 80s now and retired to his farm in Kentucky, but he's a world-renowned farmer philosopher. And this quote is out of a 2018 New York Times op-ed from Wendell Berry, where he says, agricultural choices must be made by these inescapable standards, the ecological health of the farm and the economic health of the farmer. That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. And if we recognize those standards, and again, as Wendell says, that they are inescapable, then we will achieve ecological health and economic health. I also love this quote by Masanabu. Masanabu is the author of One Straw Revolution, and he is the Wendell Berry of Japan. And this quote pretty much describes where we have gone so wrong over the last several decades in agriculture and agricultural research. He says, an object seen in isolation from the whole is not the real thing. Folks, think about that. Think about what Masanabu is saying here. We have made this mistake as farmers and ranchers and as agricultural researchers over and over and over again over the last 8 decades. We're trying to view everything in isolation and then thinking we can somehow all come together when we've got all these different types of researchers trying all of these things in isolation, and then somehow we're all going to come together and put it together into the whole. That's not happening. That is not happening. Rather, what we're doing is we're further and further isolating ourselves from the whole. So we really need to look at things holistically. We got to look at things as a system. If we learn to view things that way, then what will happen is that we'll gain a far greater understanding of what's going on around us, and we'll have the ability to figure things out a lot more quickly and a lot better. One of the things that we teach within regenerative agriculture and adaptive stewardship is what we call historical ecological perspective. Now, this is very important because we have to think back to what our landscapes were like. Wherever you live, wherever you farm or ranch, you need to really research what your landscape was like. What was the biodiversity, the ecological diversity there 400, 500 years ago, even 1,000 years ago? What did it look like at that point? And the reason that's so important is because it tells us how that landscape once functioned. And it also allows us to be able to understand what can still be in our latent seed bank, what's available. And that latent seed bank is incredibly powerful. We have actually tapped seed banks all over the world, and certainly all over North America, with a very high degree of success. And right here in the Deep South, we have found that we still have a very vibrant latent seed bank. And I'm going to show you that in a little bit when I show you the diversity that we've already cataloged at our farm in Alabama. And by the way, for any of you attending our in-person workshop on Friday, we welcome you, and we're going to be looking at a lot of the things that I'm presenting this morning in detail while we're out in the field there at the farm on Friday. So when we look at what the Deep South used to be, it was made up of a mosaic of true southern prairies. Okay? We had real prairies here in the Deep South. We were not just completely forested. That's if you were taught that, and I was taught that as an elementary school student, that is absolutely false. That is completely wrong. We had quite a few prairies in the Deep South, including coastal prairies all the way to the coast, all the way to the Gulf. And then the second part of that mosaic were wooded savannas. Now, these savannas were not the dense, thick, choked woods that we encounter today through the Deep South. Rather, they were very open woods with huge stands of virgin timber. And they were so open that it was easy for early settlers to be able to drive their wagons through without any problem. As a matter of fact, it was fairly easy for Hernando de Soto and early Spanish explorers and their large exploration parties of 600 men or more to be able to move with speed through the Deep South. If they had encountered the dense, thick, choked woods that we think are common today and what always existed, they wouldn't have made a quarter of a mile a day in progress with their 600-man plus party, including all of their supply wagons and all of that. They would have turned around, got back on the ships, went back to Spain, and said, this is an impenetrable continent. But instead, they were able to make very rapid progress in their travels through the Southeast. And then the other two primary components of this Southeastern mosaic were two types of wetland. We had wooded wetland and grassed wetland. So that was pretty much the primary mosaic of what we once encountered through the Southeast. And we had all types of browsing, grazing, and foraging ruminants. We had eastern bison that existed here, elk, deer, all of those types of things were very plentiful. Now, just to give you another idea of historical ecological perspective, this is from the diary of William Clark from the Lewis and Clark expedition. And this was an entry from William Clark on July the 4th, 1804. Now, I left his spelling, okay? This is not my spelling. I can spell a little bit better than that, but this is William Clark's spelling. He was a terrible speller, but an incredible writer, as you can tell by his quote here. But he said, the plains of this country are covered with elite green grass, well calculated for the sweetest and most nourishing hay, interspersed with copses of trees, spreading their lofty branches over pools, springs, and brooks of fine water. And groups of shrubs covered with the most delicious fruit are to be seen in every direction. And nature appears to have exerted herself to beautify the scenery by the variety of flowers, delicately and highly flavored, rising above the grass, which strikes and perfumes the sensation and amuses the mind. And then he goes on to say, in a country thus situated far removed from the civilized world, to be enjoyed by nothing but the buffalo, elk, deer, and bear in which it abounds. And then he says savage Indians. Now I'm going to contend and ask who were the savages here, because the Native Americans living in what William Clark just described, which is Northeast Kansas. Today, what we know as Northeast Kansas, Donovan County, Kansas, was a paradise. And the Native Americans living there had an outstanding life here. They had bountiful bison, elk, deer, bear, fruit, all kinds of food resources available to them. So they had an incredibly vibrant world that they lived in. Now, the point I'm trying to bring up here is not only that were the Native Americans at that time enjoying this incredible bounty, but also the fact that in 1804, take a look at the time, the date, folks, this so struck William Clark that he wrote this about it. He had never seen anything like this before in the entire eastern half of the US in 1804. Now, he was born in the 1770s in Virginia. So this means he was born before the United States was the United States. And that means that in the late 1700s, the very early 1800s, he had never seen anything like this in the eastern US. We had already so degraded the eastern portion of the current US that this was something that totally amazed him and the exploration party. And just to give you an example of how many game they encountered during their expedition from May 1804 to September 1806, they had an exploration party of about 45 people. This is the amount of game that they killed during that time period to be able to feed themselves. 1,001 deer, 375 elk, 227 bison, 62 pronghorn, on and on. So you can see they ate very well. They absolutely did not go hungry, and they didn't have to venture far at all from the rivers that they were traveling to be able to find this game. It was easy for them to be able to harvest this game on their journey. Now, this is from one of our clients' ranches in northeastern New Mexico near Cimarron. And I put this up here to just simply show you the diversity that can exist. This was not staged in any way. This happens every day on the ranch. And if you look very carefully, you can count multiple species all together. We saw elk, pronghorn antelope, mule deer, and whitetail deer all in one group, all moving together. And they do this all the time across the ranch. Now, there is one keystone species missing that would have been there historically, and that is the bison. But they have cattle now, cows, so the cows are the proxy for the bison. So we actually have 5 ruminant species utilizing this ranch between the domesticated and the wild. So what this means, folks, is that in historical ecological context, the bison didn't roam by themselves. The elk didn't roam by themselves, nor the antelope. It was much more like the Serengeti of Africa. They traveled together. That's what this used to look like. And these would have been scenes that Lewis and Clark and other early explorers would have encountered. But yet we're able to restore these scenes to these Western ranches through regenerative ranching. Now we're also seeing a lot of birds return. Earlier, I talked about birds. So here on the ranch near Cimarron, they have, and this is a CS ranch, they have a lot of wild turkey. They also have other ground nesting birds that have returned. They have quail, they have prairie chicken, and sharp-tailed grouse. So numerous species of ground nesting birds have returned to their ranch, not any neighboring ranches. These birds do not exist on the neighboring ranches other than passing over or passing through. They nest, breed, brood, all of that on the CS ranch because the CS ranch now has the habitat that these ground nesting birds require. So we're seeing this over and over. Now, here's another quote I love. It says, "A few more years of increased sterility will drive the inhabitants of the Atlantic states westward for support. Whereas if they were taught how to improve the old soil, instead of going in pursuit of new and productive soil, they would make these acres, which now scarcely yield them anything, turn out beneficial to themselves." Now, who said that and when? Well, there you go. George Washington in 1796. So think about this. Brand new country. And the first president of this country is saying, we've already farmed out the soils of the Atlantic states. Already farmed them out. Most of you today, well, I would venture to say all of you today are farming subsoil. You're not farming original topsoil. It's no longer there. It's been long gone. You're farming subsoil. My family's farm that I grew up on, we were farming subsoil. As a matter of fact, by 1870, where I grew up in South Carolina on my family's farm, it's now documented that through that entire region, the Piedmont region, the North Carolina and South Carolina, we had already lost by 1870 more than a foot of original topsoil. So let's look at what we call the soil health principles. We're going to start diving into how can we restore things now. So there are 6 soil health principles that we teach and that we help our clients to practice. The first one is context. And this historical ecological context is a part of that. You've got to know and define your context for your farm, your ranch. Nobody else can do this for you. Only you can define your context. And whenever we work with anybody, this is the first thing that we do. We sit down with them and we discover their context, because if we're not working within their context, none of the other 5 principles of soil health are going to work. Okay. You've got to apply each of these other 5 principles and the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship within your context, not your local university's context, not my farm's context, not your extension agent or NRCS person's context. Now, all of them can be very helpful to you, and I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is their context is not your context. Even your next door neighbor's context is not your context. It's unique to you alone. So you've got to clearly define that and understand what that is, both from a historical and a current perspective. The second principle is to minimize soil disturbance. And what is soil disturbance? Tillage, chemical and synthetic applications, overgrazing, even hay. All of those things create soil disturbance. So we need to understand, how can we minimize soil disturbance? Now, some of the things that I just named may be necessary. So what I'm not saying here is that we can't do any of those, but what I am saying is that we need to understand their potential for degrading our soil. And if we're going to use any of those practices, then what practices can we implement immediately afterward to make sure that we are minimizing that soil health disturbance? Third principle, keep your soil covered or armored. I travel across North America all the time, year round. And one of the most disturbing things that I see day in and day out, whether I'm driving or whether I'm flying across the country, I'm always looking and observing. I see way too much bare soil, huge expanses of bare soil across this country through far too much of the year. This is creating enormous problems for us, folks, in a multiplicity of ways. We must, absolutely must, learn how to keep our soil covered. Now, that doesn't just mean keep the soil covered or armored in row cropping situations by planting cover crops in between our cash crops. But it also means if we mow hay too short and too routinely, and if we graze too tight, we are not keeping our soil armored. We're not keeping it covered. And I'm going to show you evidence of that as we continue to go through the presentations today. So it's not just tillage, but again, remember, haying and overgrazing can also be culprits in unarmoring our soil. The fourth is increased diversity. We have way too many monocultures. And this is not just monocultures of plants, whether it's a crop or whether it's our pasture crop or whatever it may be, but it's also monocultures in terms of our livestock. Where did we get to the point that we believe that if we're a cow-calf producer, we can only have beef cattle and that's it, and we can't have any other species on our farms? Or if we're a dairy, we can only have dairy cattle and we can't have any other species, or whatever the case may be. We need diversity in everything, in plants, in insects, in microbes, even in our livestock species. The more diversity that we can create, the better our soil health progress is going to be. Bottom line, this never fails. If we do this right, we will always significantly improve our soil health. The fifth principle is living roots in the soil year round, living roots in the soil. Now, all of you are from the Deep South and you're saying, well, that's not a problem here, Alan. And you're right, it's not. We can easily have living roots in the soil year round, and therefore we should. But what I will tell you, we work through every province in Canada and all the way up to the Northwest Territories. And I can tell you that in that cold climate, we have also been able to achieve living roots in the soil year round, even in the cold climate. So this is not just something unique to the southern tier of North America. We can also achieve this in the northern tier of North America. And then the final or sixth principle is the integration of livestock through adaptive grazing. And I'm going to spend a lot of time today talking about adaptive grazing and what that means. So those are the 6 principles of soil health. And if we practice these within the first principle, within context, you will be successful. Now, why do we do this? Because we want to positively impact the 4 ecosystem processes. And they are the water cycle, the mineral cycle, energy flow, and community dynamics. So just very briefly, the water cycle. We have a broken water cycle in North America. And I'll show you some data and case studies to illustrate that. We've measured water infiltration rates hundreds of thousands of times across all of Canada, from Nova Scotia through British Columbia, and in every single one of the 50 US states and down into Mexico. So we've measured water infiltration rates across literally all of North America. And what we have found is that the vast majority of farms and ranches, unfortunately, have very poor water infiltration capacity. And again, I'm going to show you some data to substantiate that. We need to significantly improve our water infiltration capacity by aggregating our soil. When we do that, we get an incredible rebound of a properly functioning water cycle. Mineral cycle. We have so damaged our soil microbial population that we have a dysfunctional mineral cycle. And that's why we've become so reliant on the application of synthetic fertilizers or manures, applied manures, because we have basically short-circuited our natural microbial process in the soil and the ability of those microbes, particularly mycorrhizal fungi, as a group of species, to be able to effectively cycle minerals that exist in our soil. Energy flow, photosynthesis. We need to optimize photosynthetic activity. We're going to talk about that and how we do that. And then community dynamics, which is also called biological succession. So we want to optimize these 4 ecosystem processes. Now, one of the things that we want to do that is protect the soil always. It's too easy. If we have bare exposed soil, short mown pastures where we're mowing for hay, or overgrazed pastures, for the temperature of that soil to heat up well over 100 degrees. This is very common. You see an example of this here. The ambient temperature the day that these temps were taken was 88 degrees. You can see where there's shade, some shade with forage growing. The soil temperature is 87. Where it was bare, it was 107. This is in Mississippi. This is a client that this was taken the first time we went to visit them. At that point in time, this farm had been very conventionally grazed, and you can see it by the evidence here. The cattle had tightly grazed some areas and left other tufts of grass around where there were manure pads that were undegraded. And that's what you're seeing there with the guy with his arm searching through, okay? Where the grass was grazed down tight, this was taken in May. Where the grass was grazed down tight, the temperature of the soil was 109 degrees with an ambient temperature of 85 degrees at the time we took the temp. But where the tuft of grass was left, the soil temperature was 78 degrees. Where did we have biological functioning and nutrient cycling and water cycling occurring? We had it over there in the tuft of grass with the manure pad in the middle of it that the cattle did not graze. Over there to the right, where the soil was 109 degrees, we had shut down the water cycle, shut down the mineral cycle, and caused the microbes to go dormant. So nothing biologically good was happening over there to the right. It was all happening in these little patches to the left. Another example of this up in Michigan, we're working with a lot of dairies for General Mills on a project we're doing with them. This picture is on one of the dairies. This is an 8,000 cow dairy, so a very large dairy. The guy in the yellow shirt is the owner of the dairy, and the guy in the gray shirt is Kent Solberg. He's one of our consultants at Understanding Ag. They're standing out in one of the cover crop fields that the owner of the dairy planted for the very first time. This was his first year of ever planting cover crops. So he was just getting his feet wet, learning about covers, and starting to try to improve his soil health and water infiltration. But let's look at what happened here. So you see where the owner of the dairy and Kent are standing, there's a lot more growing there. And then you see as you get further out into this cover crop field, you'll see that it gets sort of thin and bare. Now, they had been very dry and very hot for Michigan, not hot for Mississippi, but hot for Michigan. And you can see that the cover crop on those dry knolls was pretty thin. But where water had run off the road and through the ditch and into the cover crop field where Kent and the farmer are standing, you can see that the cover crop was a lot thicker, a lot denser there. So let's look at the actual temps then on these different areas. The air temp that day, this was August. The air temp that day was 89 degrees. Now, where Kent and the farmer are standing, where we had a nice dense cover of cover crop, the soil temp was 79 degrees. Where you see the unmown portion of the ditch, where the mower did not get to because of those trees growing there in the ditch, the soil temp was 72 degrees. The mown portion of the ditch, pay very careful attention to this, folks. This would be what a mown hayfield is like, okay? That's just like a mown hayfield, freshly mown hayfield. 117 degrees soil temperature. Out where the cover crop was thin, 118 degrees. The temperature of the blacktop, 118 degrees. Do y'all see that? There was a pregnant pause on purpose. I wanted you to look at this and to realize the magnitude of this. This is staggering and it is hugely meaningful. If we want highly active biology, if we want a functional water cycle, a functional mineral cycle, and we want to significantly lower our input cost while increasing our productivity, one of the first things we've got to do is protect our soil. Protect our soil, protect that temperature. Also in Michigan, at one of our dairy farms up there, this was in the middle of a cornfield in July, and the corn was completely canopied, and this field is irrigated. They have a center pivot irrigation here. But look at what's happening to the soil. This soil is heavily crusted, heavily compacted and plated, and you can see so much so to the point that it's cracking and peeling on top. And if you look at the clod or the pad up at the top left, you see all that white in there? That's salt. Salt. These soils are salinating because they cannot infiltrate either rainfall or irrigation water well because the soils are in such poor shape. And with all this irrigation, you've got rapid evaporation and it's leaving behind salt. If they keep this up, these fields are going to be unfarmable in another 5 years. They're going to be too heavy salinated. We're already seeing this out west in the western region of the US. There's numerous center pivots and wheel lines out west that are now unfarmable because the soils were so degraded and they kept applying irrigation, rapidly evaporating, leaving behind salts that they have so heavily salinated those soils, they can no longer farm them. So we've got a problem. And I love this quote by Albert Einstein: no problem can be solved by the same consciousness that created it. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't be solved by the same person that created it, but it means that we have to change our mind. So back to that introductory quote from Don Campbell, we have to change the way we see things. So what do we not want? Well, we don't want pastures that look like this, okay? Overgrazed, undegraded cow patties, even to the point that we're starting to get erosion and gullies forming and all of that. And then, of course, this increases our reliance pretty heavily on hay and other supplemental feedstuffs. I've been raising livestock my entire life. I'm 61 years old now, and I can tell you I've never found a cheap supplemental feedstuff. And hay is often the most expensive supplemental feedstuff, not the cheapest at all. It's typically, when you apply all true cost to your hay production, it's often one of the most expensive feedstuffs that you feed in any given year, especially in return or in light of the return to the cattle that you get from it, okay? So the more we don't have to feed supplemental feedstuffs, including hay, the better off we are. Andre Voissan, just like I said, you need to know who Wendell Berry is. You also need to know who Andre Voissan is. He passed away in 1964, but he was a world-renowned French biochemist and farmer. And he not only wrote biochemistry textbooks that have been used in universities worldwide, but he also wrote books on grazing. And Andre Voissan in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and early 60s did a ton of observation. And what he observed and noted is still extremely applicable to those of us today who are grazers. And the first thing that he says is overgrazing has little to do with the number of animals that you're grazing, but rather much more to do with the amount of time plants were exposed to those animals. And we're going to dig deep into this today, okay, and why that is so true. And he went on to say in his book that if animals remained in any one place too long or returned to it too soon, those animals always overgraze certain plants. So, and this is an example straight out of his book, one cow grazing on a 10-acre paddock all grazing season can kill thousands of plants through overgrazing while being understocked. But 1,000 cows grazing that same 10-acre paddock for just a few moments, an hour, whatever, in that same day will not kill a single plant. As a matter of fact, what they will do is stimulate biology, stimulate the latent seed bank, apply an incredible amount of fertility, and significantly improve the microbiome of that 10-acre paddock. And you'll, as a result, you will see far greater diversity growing in that paddock, from far greater plant species to microbial species, and then insects and bird species that are supported by that. So what is adaptive grazing? Adaptive grazing is a form of grazing that allows us to be fully adaptable and flexible to ever-changing conditions. It produces the greatest results in the shortest period of time. We personally have been doing this for more than 30 years, and we have clients that have been doing it for 50 plus. No one has reached a threshold worldwide. Everywhere that this is being properly applied, no one has reached a threshold. So that is something that is profound. Rather, what we're seeing is continuous incremental progress, and it's allowing us to achieve the highest levels of profitability. So what are the keys then to adaptive grazing? First of all, it is goal-oriented. Second, it is predicated on stock density, not stocking rate. Now, we still have to pay attention to stocking rate, so that's not what I'm saying at all. If your farm will only run 100 cows, then don't think you're all of a sudden going to be able to run 400 on it. That's not going to happen. You can increase stocking rate over time, but not initially. And I caution against that. Do not try to increase it initially. We'll define stocking density and talk about it here in just a moment, but that's the key to adaptive grazing, not stocking rate, stocking density. Management and flexibility are key, as are frequent movement and frequent rest. It is also dependent on complete plant root system recovery before we return to a previously grazed pasture. And we'll talk about how do we know that? How do we know that we've got root system recovery? Okay. In many areas of North America and the world, it's highly reliant on temporary fencing technology. Now, luckily today, we have outstanding temporary fencing technology, and it continues to improve. And we also have those that are developing no fence technology, that it's not everything I've seen right now, it's not yet ready for prime time and ready to be utilized in a true adaptive grazing situation. But the companies that are working on this are continuously working and improving the technology. However, what I will say, as Felicia read my bio, she said that we're working not only on small and intermediate acre properties around the world, but we're also working on very, very large landscapes. We have clients that have 1 million acres or more. As a matter of fact, one of our clients has just a little over 2 million acres. And on some of these very large and very rugged landscapes, we're using herding instead of temporary fencing technology. So cowgirls and cowboys on horseback and dogs and things like that to move the livestock on a daily basis and place them in the area that we want them to graze every day. So herding is just as effective as temporary fencing technology. If we do this right, we create very positive compounding and cascading effects. Now, what we're trying to achieve here is a renewal of a fully functioning carbon cycle. That's very important to us. And we're trying to simulate nature. The pictures on the bottom left and the right side were taken by a good friend of mine and colleague, Dr. Jason Roundtree at Michigan State University, when he was over in Africa a couple of years ago. But these pictures are very appropriate because they show us what North America once looked like. Africa was not the only continent where you could see these scenes. Very large herds of wild ruminants that also existed here. Again, historical ecological context. This is a wildebeest migration. Again, in Africa, I believe this is in Botswana or either Tanzania. And this again simulates what early explorers in North America saw. Lewis and Clark encountered migrations of bison that were so large, single herds that were so large that they stopped them for an entire day at a time. They couldn't move forward because it was one nonstop massive herd of bison, accompanied with elk and antelope and all of that. We have many other explorers from Texas and Mexico all the way up into Canada that describe similar scenes from the 15, 16, 17, and even into the 1800s. We also know that antelope, pronghorn antelope, because we have written reports of massive herds of pronghorn antelope that existed just like the bison. So today, we no longer have that. Our wild ruminants across North America are very fractured and in small groups. So how do we achieve what they achieved in terms of building soil, building diversity, building ecosystems? We do it through biomimicry and ecomimicry, through using our domesticated livestock to simulate what the wild ruminants once were able to do across the breadth and depth of this continent. So what does it look like when we talk about stock density? Well, here's a few pictures to illustrate. Top left is 100,000 pounds per acre. Top right is 250,000 pounds. Bottom left is 500,000 pounds. Bottom right is 1,000,000 pounds per acre. Now, we actually have clients that we've worked with that have now gone over 2 million pounds per acre stock density for very, very short periods of time. And the results are staggering, absolutely phenomenal when you do that. So pay attention to this statement. We do all of these stock densities and many more some of the time, no one stock density all of the time. I'm going to repeat that. We do all of these stock densities and many more some of the time, no one stock density all of the time. So let me caution you here. Do not pick a stock density. Don't pick 100,000 pounds or 250,000 and say, that's the magic, that's the silver bullet, and that's where I'm going to stay at from this point forward. If you do that, you have just become non-adaptive and non-regenerative. You have implemented a prescription, and regenerative and adaptive practices are non-prescriptive in nature, okay? So don't pick any one of these and think that's the solution. And unfortunately, a lot of the research, peer-reviewed published research that I read, where they say they did regenerative grazing or adaptive grazing or mob grazing, however they termed it, and it didn't work any better than conventional or conventional rotational grazing. Every single time they picked something, they made it prescriptive, not adaptive. So they were not doing regenerative and adaptive in their research. And that's what we have to realize. You know, I'm a scientist as well, and I can read their methodologies. They were incorrectly defining what they thought they were doing in their own research. So we also do this with bison. We now work with numerous bison herds across the US and Canada. And with bison, we were able to achieve very high stock densities, as you see in these pictures, under a single strand of poly wire. So grasp the enormity of that. We have bison respecting a single strand of poly wire and moving daily behind a single strand. The pictures that you see here are from one of our clients, Standing Butte Ranch near Pierre, South Dakota. But guess what? I can use other species to achieve high stock density. This is at our farm in Alabama. So for any of you that are going to show up on Friday for our in-person field session there, you'll get to see this. These are pictures I took very recently of our laying hens. And it's incredible the amount of stock density that we can get per acre with the laying hens. And we move these every day to every 2 days, year round. And the degree of trample impact and fertility application and microbial stimulation that a small species like a chicken can do in mass is absolutely phenomenal. So again, we're continuously moving them across the landscape, and we're getting this incredible high stock density impact. These 3 gentlemen here visited us about a month ago. They're all from Louisiana. And they came to BDA, to our farm, and they wanted to see what was going on. And you can see nestled in among them is one of our guardian dogs that lives with and guards the chickens on a daily basis. I'm going to show you now a move of our cattle. This is a herd of 600 head of grass finishers. So this is all it takes to move them to a new paddock. We just simply took up the polywire between the prior paddock and the next paddock, and we're moving the grass finishers now into the new paddock. So it's that quick, that fast. Note all the different birds and bird species. We are seeing an incredible population of birds that every time we move the cattle, the birds are moving with them. This includes the snowy egrets that you're seeing there, cowbirds, and wood swallows. So we're seeing an incredible number of bird species following them. And then as we look at them as they continue to move into the new paddock, you can see they're pretty fat. These are all basically weighing 900 pounds and up that we're getting ready for harvest. And this is their finishing ration. What you see right there, that's their finishing ration and what they get to eat every single day. So they actually live a pretty good species, or a pretty good life, excuse me. And I just saw a question in the chat. You mean cowbird is a species? Yep, brown cowbird is a species. And again, you can see the densities at which they're grazing under as we are finishing these cattle on grass. So let's dive in now to what we call the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship, the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. The first is the rule of compounding, the second, the rule of diversity, and the third, the rule of disruption. And I want you to understand that no matter what you're grazing, the species does not matter. These 3 rules apply. And also, it doesn't matter where you're located. We're applying these rules in the more than 34 countries that we've worked in. And they work in every one of those locations globally. So the first one, the rule of compounding, is simply this. There are never any singular effects or impact. Never. We are always encountering compounding and cascading effects. Also, these compounding and cascading effects are never neutral. They are either positive or negative. So it means that our management matters. What we do matters a lot, because we're either influencing negative compounding effects or positive compounding effects. And this also holds true for epigenetics. Now, we won't dive deep into epigenetics today due to lack of time, but I've written numerous articles on this and done webinars on this. So those are available on our website at understandingag.com. And later this fall, I'll be doing yet another webinar diving much deeper into epigenetics. And anybody can tune into that. The next is the rule of diversity. So again, the rule of compounding, understand that compounding and cascading effects are always occurring, whether we realize it or not, and that our management matters, okay, in that regard. The next rule, the rule of diversity. We want highly diverse and complex pastures, and if we're planting annuals, in our annual mixes, not monocultures, okay? You cannot achieve high levels of soil health at all without or with monocultures. You just can't do it. It's impossible, okay? And nowhere does nature place a monoculture. Where nature is in control, we see incredible abundance and diversity in plants, in microbes, in insects, birds, and other species. We don't ever see just a single species of anything in nature. It's always a multiplicity, okay? Man is the only creature that creates a monoculture. And we've done a lot of damage doing that. So we need to reintroduce diversity. And not only diversity in terms of plant species. For instance, if I go out there and I plant 6 different species of grasses in my pasture, I'm still not diverse. I just have 6 species of grasses. diversity not only encompasses one functional group, we also have to have diversity in multiple functional groups. So in my pastures, I want to see grasses and multiple species of grasses, multiple species of legumes, multiple species of forbs, and even woody species, okay? All of them are critically important, and I don't discriminate against any of them ever. And again, if you come Friday to BDA Farm, you'll see this, and you'll see how it functions within our system. So why complexity and diversity? Because it creates very positive compounding and cascading effects. And because as we have a diversity of plant species, they produce a wide array of secondary and tertiary plant compounds, which I'll dive into in just a little bit. But this is from the work of Dr. Fred Provenza and others. Fred is a very close friend of ours. He also serves on our Understanding Ag Board of Advisors. And Fred is a retired professor emeritus from Utah State University. And he's done 40 years of research in looking at plant species diversity and how it positively impacts both wildlife and domesticated animals, and ultimately our human health. So again, we'll look at this a little later, but these secondary and tertiary compounds are medicinal and anti-parasitic in nature, okay? Medicinal and anti-parasitic. So if we have a monoculture or a low diversity in our pastures, we are not allowing our livestock much of an opportunity to, number one, balance their diet, nor are we allowing them the opportunity to self-medicate and self-deworm. We have just removed that from their ability. That's our fault that they can't do that. So if we have far greater diversity, then we have more of these secondary and tertiary medicinal and anti-parasitic compounds that naturally deworm our livestock and naturally self-medicate our livestock. It also creates, when we have plant species diversity, we will always see a greater diversity in soil microbial species, a greater diversity in macroorganisms, and these results are exponential rather than linear in nature. So let's talk a little bit about that functional group called forbs. Many people call these weeds, okay? Now, weeds have a purpose. They have a purpose. Now, one of the things wherever I speak in the world, I always, every single time, ask my audience this question: define a weed. And in those audiences have been hundreds of thousands of farmers and ranchers, soil scientists, forage agronomists, extension agents, NRCS personnel, on and on and on. And I've asked every one of them every single time to define a weed. No matter where we go in the world, we get the exact same definitions. But no one has ever given me an objective definition of a weed. No one. Not any weed scientist. You won't find it in any weed science textbook. You won't find anyone that can give you an objective definition of a weed. Every definition of a weed that anybody gives you is always subjective. For instance, what's a weed in a cornfield? Well, anything but corn, right? Anything but corn. But yet many of the plants that may want to grow in a cornfield, you would be very happy with in your pastures, and you would not call them a weed in your pasture. Now, if I have a farmer that grows a rotation of corn and soybeans, he planted corn last year and then soybeans this year in his rotation, 9 times out of 10, they're going to have some corn wanting to come up in soybeans this year. Now, last year, the corn was not a weed because he planted a cornfield. But this year, the corn, because it was growing up in his soybeans, is all of a sudden now a weed. Last year, it wasn't a weed. This year, now it's a weed. Okay? So there is no such thing as an objective definition of a weed. Rather, what we need to be doing is identifying the benefits of these plants that we call weeds. Why are they growing there? They're not growing there to aggravate and agitate us, to make us angry, or to make us spend money. They are growing there because this is where we have to point our finger back at ourselves. Every time we have to point our finger back at ourselves. They're growing there, that pigweed, that thistle, that ragweed, that dog fennel, whatever, that milkweed, whatever the case may be, because we created the opportunity. We did. We created the opportunity. We overgrazed, we overtilled, whatever we did. We created a degradation in the soil. And nature is saying, I'm choosing you out of the seed mite. I'm choosing thistle to grow there, or pigweed or ragweed or whatever to grow there, to repair and rebuild and restore that soil. And if you'll take your shovels, folks, and you'll dig in these areas where you see a lot of weeds coming up real thick, and then go dig in an area where you have just a monoculture or very low diversity, and it can be just a few feet away. Dig down about a foot with your shovel and take a look, compare the soils. You're going to see a dramatic difference. The soil where these so-called weeds are growing is going to be better than the soil a few feet away where the weeds are not growing. And you've got monoculture or very low diversity. And that happens practically every time. There's some good books out there that help you understand why certain weeds are growing in certain areas at certain times. One of those is called Weeds and What They Tell Us. Okay, Weeds and What They Tell Us. But you can Google that, and you'll find a lot of other very good books that allow us to be able to understand why certain weeds are showing up at certain times. But here's the other thing. Do you see all these weeds I'm listing here? Do your livestock eat those? Mine do. And so do many of our clients. There's not anything listed here that our cattle, our sheep, our goats, our chickens, and our pigs will not eat. Not a darn one. They'll eat thistle like it's candy. They love pigweed and ragweed. They'll eat dog fennel. As a matter of fact, our sheep will purposefully prune dog fennel so that it grows back up real bushy. They love that. That's one of their favorite things to do. So they'll eat all of this. Again, come visit us on Friday at the in-person workshop and you'll see some of this. So we got to ask ourselves, what is nature trying to tell me? What do we need to learn by these weeds that we think are pestilences out there in our pastures? What are they telling us? So diversity is key, okay? Here's what's in the BDA farm seed bank. Here is what we have documented so far. So we've got a lot of tame grass species that were there before we bought the farm, okay? Bermuda grass, Dallas grass, signal grass, Johnson, fescue, Bahia, on and on. Okay, we've got all of that. All of that's growing. And then your requisite red clovers, white clovers, vetch, Lespedeza, various rushes and sedges. All of those are there. We always say we've got every weed known to man. And I don't sweat that at all. As a matter of fact, I celebrate that. And some of you may be making faces and like, that man's an idiot. What in the heck is he talking about? But these things that we call weeds are highly valuable to us and make us a whole lot of money, a lot of money. So we've got peppervine and ragweed and pigweed and ironweed and dog fennel and thistle and ferns and sumpweed and curly dock and lesser burdock and plantain and chicory and dandelion and on and on and on. Okay, we've got a lot of native plant species that haven't been seen in our region for decades and even 100 to 200 years now that we have now documented coming back up from the latent seed bank. We've documented things like Florida paspalum and bushy bluestem, little bluestem, big bluestem, switchgrass, eastern gamagrass, Indian grass, purple top tridents, purple lovegrass, on and on, blue wild rye. I mean, you just keep going. It's listed there for you. Many of the Florida panicums, Native legumes, we're seeing partridge pea and bundle flower, white and yellow sweet clover, hairy lespedeza, groundnut, wild sienna, sensitive briar, white prairie clover, and so forth. We're also seeing many, many flowering plants like pinkweed and fireweed, Virginia metabeauty, or purple foxglove, blue vervain, panicled aster, blue mist flower, and again, just keep going. We have several hundred beehives out on the farm, and our bees love this diversity. They forage year round. They never have a lack of flowering plants. We have plant species that are flowering every single month of the year. That also means that our honey is incredibly rich. And we've had many people that are now using our honey who have used other honeys like a clover honey or something like that and told us that it wasn't very helpful with their allergies, that now have complete relief of their allergies because our bees are foraging a far more diverse landscape. So it makes a difference even in the honey and the quality of the honey and its ability to help people with allergies. So again, y'all will see many, many of these plants if you're coming Friday in the BDA seed bank. And oh, by the way, you see every one of these. There's not a one of these on this list that our livestock have not eaten. Not a one of them. They will eat every single one of these. And I don't think I have it listed here, but we also have a lot of wild asparagus. And in April of every year, we harvest quite a bit of that wild asparagus for our markets. So we can do a lot of food foraging in our fields and our woods as well. So manage for diversity and don't sweat the weeds, okay? This is some of Fred Provenza's stuff. Fred talks about our landscape should be diverse arrays of plants, and if they are, then they become nutrition centers and pharmacies with vast arrays of phytochemicals to feed our livestock. And I'm going to, after lunch, I'm going to dive into a lot of case studies, and we're going to show you why this is the case, why what Fred has discovered is absolutely true. So our landscapes, if they have enough diversity, then they are providing an incredible array of food resources for our herbivores, our omnivores, and our carnivores, both above and beneath the soil surface. And we have also found that the health of our livestock improves significantly when we have far more diverse pastures. I don't know if any of you on today are stocker operators and you buy stocker calves, maybe you buy peewees and develop peewees, and or you buy larger stocker calves or whatever. But health of those calves is always of key concern to you if you're a stocker calf operator. Well, what we have found ourselves and what Fred's research has shown is that when we have far more diverse pastures for those stocker calves, we have far less issues with sickness, far less morbidity and mortality. They gain weight more efficiently, and they reach targeted weights a lot quicker. By the way, with less emissions as well. And we've been using what are called eddy like in a river or a stream, EDDY, eddy covariance flux towers to measure 24/7, 365 greenhouse gas emissions. And we've had these out on farms and ranches across North America since 2014. So we know what's happening from an emission standpoint as well. Russian olive. This is a plant that many ranchers say livestock absolutely will not touch. Really? Well, take a look at this. You know, they are turned into this paddock. They go straight to the Russian olive. 4 hours later, they've got every leaf stripped. Now, by the way, I saw a question, what is an eddy covariance flux tower? What do they measure? They measure all the greenhouse gases. So carbon dioxide emissions, nitrous oxide, methane, all of that on a continuous 24/7 basis in any given field. Cattle can graze trees, okay? And later this afternoon, I'm going to show you a video of that. And they even do that on our farm down in Alabama. And that video was from our farm. Again, with stocker calves, when they're grazing diverse pastures rather than low diversity or monoculture pastures, morbidity and mortality significantly decrease. So we make a lot more profit. The biggest profit, just depriver, the thing that sucks the most profit out of a stocker operation is morbidity and mortality. And when we can practically eliminate that through far greater diversity in our pastures, we're going to have far, far more profitable stocker operations. Now, Fred also shows us that plants can see, they can breathe, they can smell, taste, talk, listen, hear, and react and respond on a 24/7 basis. So in essence, plants are not just something with roots sticking in the ground holding them up. Plants, just like animals and just like humans, are sentient beings. They communicate every moment of every day. And these communications with other plants and other macro and microorganisms in their environment is critically important, very important to us. And even the roots of these plants communicate. They communicate with fungi and bacteria on a 24/7 basis. And we also have to understand that the cells of every plant, of every animal, and of every human have what we call cellular knowledge, cellular memory. So the things that we do matter in terms of how the cellular memory of every cell in the plants growing in our pastures, or in the cattle or sheep or goats or whatever out there grazing in our pastures, how they respond to what we do. We've got to challenge that cellular memory. And I'm going to talk about that when we get into the third rule. And here it is. So we had the first rule, the rule of compounding. The second rule, the rule of diversity. And now the third rule, the rule of disruption. Now, the first thing that we have to understand is that nature has tremendous resilience and actually responds well to challenges. So we can use that to our benefit, to our advantage. We can introduce planned, purposeful disruptions that allow us to make significant progress in building soil health and productivity and profitability. And planned, purposeful disruptions create a host of positive compounding effects. So, how can we do that? How can we effectively work with the rule of disruption? Well, the first thing is do not do things the same way every time. This is human nature. It's what we want to do. We want a routine. We want a prescription. We want a formula. Every time we teach a soil health academy, inevitably, we'll have a farmer or rancher in the academy say, just give me the steps. Just give me the formula and I'll follow that. And immediately we'll say, no, that's the worst thing we could do for you is to give you a formula, a prescription, a recipe, because then you will follow that rigidly and you won't ever change anything. And initially you'll make progress because it's different from the way you've been doing things, but then you'll hit a wall, you'll hit a threshold that you're not able to push through. And then you'll start going backwards, no longer going forwards. And you'll wonder why. It's because you turned regenerative and adaptive into a formula, a recipe, a prescription. So we're never going to do that. We're never going to give anybody that we work with a recipe. That would be a failure on our part, and it would cause you to fail inevitably. So don't do things the same way every time. Learn to celebrate being disruptive, okay? Changing things up routinely. This is actually a lot of fun. And this has allowed us to be able to, we enjoy the heck out of what we do every single day, because every day is different now instead of being the same. Every day is different. And it allows us to be able to witness progress every day that we're out there. So what are some of the disruptions that we can introduce? These are a handful, not by any means an exhaustive list. So I want you to understand that, but just some of the disruptions that you can introduce. One is alter stock densities. Remember earlier, I said, do not pick a stock density and just do that one over and over again. Alter those stock densities. We call it stock density pulsing. So we'll go anywhere from 20,000 pounds per acre with our cattle to over 1 million pounds per acre. But we do it purposefully. In this afternoon, we're going to talk about some of that. Also, another disruption is don't move through your rotations in the same pattern year after year. So for instance, if your pastures are named pasture A, B, C, D, and E, and every spring you start in pasture A and go A, B, C, D, E, back to A, and so forth, keep the same rotation going year in and year out, stop it. Next spring, start in pasture D instead of A. Alter the rotation. Now, you may think, Alan, how in the world can that make a difference? It makes an enormous difference, folks, because of cellular memory in the plants and the microbes and the animals and everything out there in the biology that you're working with. They know, they remember that you've been doing the same rotations year after year. This makes an enormous difference. We've proven this over and over. So alter the rotations. This is where a lot of the so-called regenerative and adaptive grazing research goes wrong. Again, they're making this prescriptive. They're using the same rotations time after time. Well, that's not adaptive. That's not regenerative. And their research will not show what they think it should show because of that. Okay. Another disruption is alter grazing heights on and off. So don't think that every time I've got to go on when it's 12 inches high or 16 inches high or 8 inches high and then come off when it's 6 or 8 inches high. Again, don't do that. Alter the grazing heights on and off from time to time. Alter rest periods. This can make a profoundly positive difference. If you've been used to your rotations are every 35, 40, or 45 days, you're back to the same pasture again and grazing it again, and that's routine month after month, year after year. Pick different pastures in a given year and give them a much longer rest. You would be astounded by what a difference this can make in the productivity and the diversity that is growing there, and even the density of that growth, if you allow for a much longer rest period from time to time. If you're like us and you graze multiple species, alter the species order, okay? In other words, don't always graze cows first, then sheep, then goats, then pigs, then chickens, or whatever your rotation is. Change it up, change it up. Alter the time of season or year a paddock is grazed. If you always hit paddock A in April, and you find that that's been pretty routine, next year, don't graze paddock A in April. Wait till May or June before you graze it for the first time. We've done a lot of this out west. on BLM and U.S. Forest Service lands, public lands, where the BLM prescription has been they always put cattle out in May or whatever time of year it is for the area, and always pull them out in August or September, again, whatever, and it's prescribed every year, exact same thing, okay? But where we're able to work with them, BLM personnel and U.S. Forest personnel, to alter that, it produces a profoundly different and positive result. And they all of a sudden see plant species diversity exploding where it hasn't in decades. Alter your paddock configuration. The beautiful thing about polywire and tread-in post that we use for temporary fencing, it bends to my will. I don't have to make straight lines. Now, my granddaddy would shoot me for saying that. When I was growing up, whenever we built a fence, it better be ramrod straight. And my granddaddy would get pretty upset. But now I'm disruptive. And so I can build paddocks of any shape I want them to be. I can zigzag, I can make them circular, I can make them rectangular, I can make them square. I can make any shape that I want in my paddocks because of the polywire and the tread-in post. It makes a difference in the impact. 100,000 pounds per acre in a square paddock is not the same impact as 100,000 pounds per acre in a long, narrow, rectangular paddock. Two totally different impacts, folks. Not the same. You've got the same stock density per acre applied, but you do not have the same impact. Again, when we're doing research in this, we're always trying to make it reductive in nature instead of regenerative in nature. And we don't introduce these disruptions because we say, if I introduce the disruptions, then this doesn't fit my statistical model. I'm introducing confounding factors. Well, yes, you are. But if you don't do that, you don't have valid research in regenerative and adaptive, folks. Your replications have to be farm, 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 not little small paddock reps side by side by side. You'll never do legitimate regenerative and adaptive research that way. So we've got to alter even the way we do research and the way that we think about research relative to regenerative and adaptive. And I'll always challenge any scientist on that. I'm very open to talking. If there's scientists today that you want to do this research, talk to those of us that have been doing this for 25 and 30 years and have practical experience. We can help you in terms of how to set up legitimate research in this type of thing. So this is the last slide I'm going to show right now before lunch, and I'm going to open it up for Q&A until noon, and then we'll go to lunch and then come back and continue. This is the best tool in your toolbox, period, bar none. Observation. Observation. Okay? Observe everything. Take the time every day to observe. This is easier for women than men. When we teach soil health academies, we have about equal numbers of women and men that attend our academies almost every time. We find that, again, pretty much 100% of the time, the women do a far better job of observing than the men do. Men are checklist oriented. We want to check off our task every day. Oh, got that done, got that done, got that done. Great. I'm done for the day. You know, and we don't spend any time observing. We feel proud of ourselves for checking off of all of our tasks for the day. Women will actually take time. What am I seeing over there and why? What am I seeing over here? Oh, look at that bird over there, or look at this plant over here, or that butterfly. Well, guess what? They're not being frivolous. Their observations are important. They're meaningful, and they teach us a lot about what's going on. So it's incredibly important to observe the soil, observe your plants, insects, birds, livestock, everything going on around you, and use all your senses. Friday, in the live workshop, we're going to be doing this. We're going to be teaching people how to observe using every one of their senses: sight, sound, smell, touch, and yes, even taste. Okay. We're going to be doing that Friday. So this is important because every one of those senses that we have teaches us a lot more about what's going on around us and how we need to react and respond to it. And the reason that we want to develop our powers of observation is because if we do that, we develop keen intuition. And when we develop intuition, our decision-making is inevitably better, always better. If we take time to observe every day, and for almost all of us, we have to purposefully make ourselves do this. But if we take time to observe every day, then our decision-making process will be far, far better. Okay, so again, I'm going to stop there right now. And I'm going to open it up to questions. Okay, I'm going to start to answering questions that I see written in the chat box first, and then we'll open it up to live. So Linda asked, do you ever use controlled burns as a disruption? The answer is yes, we do. But we use them very judiciously. Where people go wrong is burning the same acres year after year after year. That's going to, in the end, degrade the soil, not improve it. And it's going to narrow plant species and other species diversity, not improve it. And we're seeing this, witnessing this in the Flint Hills of Kansas. They've burned year after year, decade after decade, and we are rapidly losing our native prairies in the Flint Hills because of that. So control burns, just like any other disruption, don't turn a disruption into a recipe, into a routine. If you do one disruption this year on an acre, don't repeat that same disruption on the same acre next year or the next year. Okay. So yes, control burns can be good, but use them judiciously. Is there a link to temporary fencing? Temporary fencing, first of all, you can Google electric fencing and those types of things. You know, Gallagher USA or Gallagher North America carries a lot of these. Premier Fencing, Ken Cove. I know I'm going to leave somebody out. American Grazing Lands. You know, there's a lot of different companies that you can Google that carry temporary fencing supplies and that do a very good job with that. So just Google that and you'll be able to find what you need there. Let's see, will we talk about how we draw out what's in our seed bank? Yes. I'll very briefly talk about that right now, but this afternoon when we get into our case studies, we're going to talk about it a lot more. How do we get our latent seed bank to respond? You must first positively impact soil health, and in particular by building soil aggregate. Okay, you can, if you've got tightly compacted plated soils, you will see very poor response from your latent seed bank. But if you have aggregated soil and then you apply higher density livestock impact over top of that, that does a fabulous job of tapping or stimulating that latent seed bank. Then once you do that, you've got to give a longer rest period. Because if you come back too soon, wherever you're trying to stimulate the latent seed bank, so you can't do every pasture in a single year. You got to rotate this around your farm or your ranch, okay? But if you come back too soon, as the new plants that you have stimulated are trying to grow, then as seedlings, your livestock will select them, eat them, pull them right up out of the ground, and you'll never even know that they were there. Never even know it. So, because you're getting rid of them by coming back and grazing it too soon. In the deep South, what does this require? A minimum of an 80-day rest. And I like to go 120 to 150 days rest on a field that I'm specifically trying to get a lot higher diversity. Okay, that's going to help you a lot. So that at least starts to answer that question. Grasshoppers is a disruption. Yes, we're actually seeing this in a lot of areas out west right now. And yes, they are a disruption. But where we see heavy infestations, they're there, just like armyworms. There's a lot of people in the South right now that are being heavily infested by armyworms. I get those calls every single day. Grasshopper infestations, armyworm infestations, any of those types of things are there because we created the situation for them to be there. We don't have any armyworm problems or grasshopper problems at BDA Farm. Do we have some armyworms? Sure we do. Do we have grasshoppers? Oh yeah, lots of them. But they're a zero problem to us. The few armyworms we do have are not eating up our forages. As a matter of fact, they're a food source for our beneficial predatory insects that we want to be there. So we actually don't want to be devoid of armyworms or other pest insects. We want some because they are food for the predator insects, the beneficial insects that we want to exist there. So we're always going to do our best to attract those. So again, when we see a lot of grasshoppers, armyworms that are just devastating everything, that's one of those things we got to turn our fingers back inward, point it at ourselves and say, what did I do as manager of my ranch, my farm, that created this situation that attracted this overwhelming number of pests. So let's see what else we have here.
Do you see the one about the selenited fields? They wondered if the selenited fields could be aided by plants that prefer that type of soil.
Thank you, Felicia. So yes, absolutely. We are healing, we are healing salinated fields across North America now. And we are doing that, Felicia, with very high levels of diversity. So we're planting very complex, very diverse cover crops that include a lot of forbs. This is where a lot of the plants that we'll call weeds become critically important. They are the plants that have the best opportunity and the most impact on those salinated soils, the ability to most rapidly heal those salinated soils. So we can reverse and remediate that process through complexity and diversity in what we plant there, and in particularly a lot of forbs. Do we have other questions?
Yes, it's one. They wanted to know what type of thermometer are you using for the heat when we were seeing the temperatures?
Yeah, so we use two types of thermometers. We use an actual probe thermometer where you physically stick the probe, into the soil, and we can stick it in 2 inches, 6 inches, a foot deep. But then we also use a thermal thermometer, and with COVID, everybody's familiar with those. You've all had them pointed at your foreheads over the last year to measure your temp and all of that. So we use the thermal thermometers as well, and we find both of those extremely useful and beneficial to us. And we carry them in our buggies with us and use them on a day in, day out basis.
Thank you. So is there any Qgis data on grazers in various US states?
I'm not sure I know how to answer that one.
they were curious about how many there are so they can know for as their own state.
That's one I can't answer.
Okay. Are there these diverse?
Now I can speak just
Go
real
ahead,
quickly. Sorry, Felicia. More specifically, Grazers doing agroforestry as well. I can speak to that on the agroforestry and the silvopasture grazing. We ourselves are doing a lot of that. And we have many, many clients throughout North America that are doing silvopasture and agroforestry. And I heavily encourage that. Why would you only have one revenue stream per any acre, whether it's open or forestry? You know, we encourage you to develop multiple revenue streams for every single acre that you have, including your wooded acres. So we'll run livestock, cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, chickens through our woodland. We'll grow mushrooms, ginseng in our woodland. Of course, we're producing timber for harvest. We grow wildlife for harvest and recreation. So we use our woodland for a multiplicity of uses, and I encourage everybody to do
that. Are these diverse remediation plants used for field remediation being composted or just degrading onto the soil, or both?
The very good question. The most rapid way to restore the soil is to not only plant and allow biomass to grow up with these, but then to take livestock and using adaptive grazing under higher density to graze it. So we get the combination of the diverse plants and forbs growing there, coupled with the biological and fertility impact of the livestock, and that creates the most rapid remediation and repair of those salinated soils when you combine those two things.
So we have quite a few questions on the temperature. The last one that come up that may be most helpful for everyone, they want to know, of course, more on the soil temperature. What soil temperature range are we looking for, or is it the difference from the air temperature that we look at?
Okay, very good question. And we actually have a table that shows that. And you can find that on our understandingag.com website, but I can tell you real quick. So the ideal temps for microbial activity are between 50 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit soil temp. Okay, that's when we're going to have the greatest degree of microbial activity, mineral cycling, water cycling, all of those types of things. Between 50 and 80 degrees. We can go up to 90 degrees and still have really good microbial activity. And I'm talking about soil temp, not air temp. Okay, we can go up to 90 degrees, but once you get above 90 degrees soil temp, now you're starting to significantly depress soil microbial activity. When you hit 100 degrees soil temp, you have just lost 85% in the top 2 inches of your soil. You have lost 85% of your soil moisture, and your microbes are shutting down in the top 2 to 3 inches, okay, when you hit 100 degrees. So we only have 15% of our soil moisture left in those top 2 to 3 inches of soil, okay? When we hit 115 degrees, then our microbes are shutting down. They're going into a metabolic sleep and doing nothing for us at all. And we've lost all of our moisture in the top 2 to 3 inches of soil. When we hit 140 degrees, we have basically pasteurized our microbes. So it's far too easy. And I'm going to show you examples after lunch. It's far too easy anywhere in North America, but particularly here in the South, for soil temps to hit 140, 150 degrees. If they're exposed, if they're grazed too tight or they're bare, they will easily hit 150 to 100 or plus degrees on almost any afternoon, any day in our summers here.
All right, thank you. Last question, where can I find resources on designing regenerative grazing studies?
Well, the best resources talk to us, to those that have done it. There's no manual on designing regenerative ag studies. That doesn't exist. Nobody's written that manual. But, again, you can talk to us. We, as I said, I'm a scientist. We have quite a few other scientists that are on our staff at Understanding Ag, so we understand research very well. And we'd welcome talking to anybody that wants to discuss proper design of regenerative research.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. This is our lunch break at this time. If you can join us back at 1 o'clock. We have 1 hour lunch break. Thank you so much. All right, everyone, welcome back to our second half of just a wonderful presentation by Dr. Williams. Again, you are joining us today for Demystifying Regenerative Grazing and Soil Health with Dr. Alan Williams. And Dr. Williams, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Felicia. I hope everybody had a good lunch. I'm going to go back to share screen. Okay, can we see my screen? Good, very good. Okay. Okay, so right before lunch, we talked about observations and the importance of observations. And so this slide just signifies that there's no observation that's too small, too little to make, that we need to be observing absolutely everything out there at every point in time. And then there's other tools that are very simple, very cheap, very easy to use that we can make routine use of, and they help us to further refine our observation and to understand what we're seeing. These tools are a shovel, okay? We call it the shovel test, but we like to use a spade or a sharpshooter, and we carry these around with us at all times. Whenever I go visit a client, I always have 2 or 3 of them in my truck. We have them in our buggies at the farm, and we use them very frequently. And basically what we do here is we like to routinely stick a shovel in the ground and pull up divots. We like to go 8 to 12 inches deep at least and pull up divots. What I try to do is shear only one side. So you need a nice stout shovel with a really good stout handle. And we just shear one side and then just literally pull the shovel back so that we break the soil open. And you want to observe the undisturbed or unsheared side, so opposite the side of the shovel blade. And we look for things like earthworms, soil aggregates. This allows us to see both whether we've got any aggregates at all, and if so, how deep does that aggregate layer go, or is our soil highly compacted, highly plated? Do we see multiple plated layers there and a crusted layer on top? And it also allows us to be able to get a good quick picture of the carbon layer in our soil. How deep does that black carbon layer go? Or do we have one at all? So a shovel tells us a lot about what's going on in our soils. And if we use it routinely, it's one of the very best tools that we can use to keep us informed about the progress that we're making. We talked about the use of the thermometer before lunch, and you definitely want to have, I would recommend both a standard probe thermometer for the soil and an infrared or thermal thermometer that you can just pull the trigger on. Both of those are very useful. Carry them with you in your buggy at all times out on the farm. A refractometer. We use these to measure plant bricks. Again, a pretty simple tool, been around for decades, been used commonly in the fruit and vegetable industry. but we can also measure Brix levels in our forages or our crops. And they teach us a lot about what's going on there. The higher the Brix, the healthier the plant is, plain and simple. And the better it is for your livestock to consume. Water infiltration ring. This is a simple 6-inch ring. You can buy them, go online and buy a 6-inch single infiltrometer water infiltration ring, or you can make one. You can cut a 6-inch metal pipe and bevel one end, cut it 6-inch. You want a 6-inch diameter pipe, 6 inches in length. Or you can even take a 6-inch PVC pipe and bevel it on one end, and you just take a block and a hammer, drive these in the ground about halfway, about 3 inches, and pour water in there and measure the infiltration rate. And there's a whole host of YouTube videos. We won't spend time today talking specifically how to do this, but there's a lot of YouTube videos. You can just Google single ring infiltrometer and you'll pull up a lot of videos that clearly show you how to do this accurately and repeatably. But again, these 4 tools, shovel, thermometer, refractometer, water infiltration ring, are 4 tools that anybody can use. It doesn't take any special knowledge, and none of these tools are expensive. And they're tools that we use every week, and some of these every day out on our farm, and we teach our clients to do the same. Now, I want to talk briefly about the microbiome. There are striking similarities, or there should be, between the microbiome of the human, of animals, of plants, and the soil. When those microbiomes are very similar, that's when all of us are at our healthiest. So we want to make sure that we're building a microbiome that is not antagonistic, but symbiotic. That's really important, because what happens with one microbiome inevitably affects the other. Just to give you an example of this, Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, who is also a part of our Understanding Ag Board of Advisors, Dr. Jonathan Lundgren has done some seminal research looking at the gut microbiome of the cow, of soil level insects like dung beetles, and soil level macroorganisms like earthworms and other insects, and of the soil itself. And what he has found is this: when animals are fed antibiotics, in other words, subtherapeutic antibiotic treatment, which is used very heavily in a lot of the livestock sectors of the livestock industry today, it first alters the gut microbiome of the animal. So the cow, the chicken, the pig, whatever is being fed the antibiotics, it alters their gut microbiome. Then that cow or that steer that's had its gut microbiome altered by the subtherapeutic antibiotics, then, takes a crap out on pasture. So now it's manure and it's urine or in the pasture, and that antibiotic residue is in that manure, in that urine. And what Dr. Lundgren's research has shown is that that antibiotic not only alters the gut microbiome of the cow, but it also alters the gut microbiome of the dung beetle, the earthworm, and other soil level insects. And not for the better, much more for the worse. So what you do to one, again, the rule of compounding, what you do to one inevitably affects many, many, many other organisms. And that's just a perfect example. And oh, by the way, the same research also shows not only is the gut microbiome being altered of all of these different organisms and the soil, okay, so we're altering the microbiome of the soil as well, but it also creates a lot more methane release. So our heavy use of subtherapeutic antibiotics in the livestock industry has actually created a lot more methane release. And again, that's because it's altering the soil microbiome that has the ability through methanotrose and other soil microbes to take care of that methane. So again, the rule of compounding comes into play. Now, these interactions between all these microbiomes also produce epigenetic effects that are either positive or negative in nature and are also transgenerational. So they last from one generation to the next to the next. So we've got to be very careful and thoughtful about what we're doing because of the rule of compounding and because of epigenetics. So one thing I want you to understand about biology and the microbiome is that biology grows out. We call this the ripple effect. Much like when you throw a pebble into a pond and you get ripples that grow and grow and grow. They start off very small and concentrated right around the pebble, and then they grow out until they reach the boundaries of the pond. Biology reacts very, very similarly. And remember this, it takes biology to grow biology. You can't take a tractor into a field and grow biology. It's very hard to apply something and grow biology. It takes biology to grow biology. In other words, our livestock are biological beings, and they have literally billions and billions of microbes on them and in them, and they're shedding those microbes all the time through their saliva, off their hair coat, through their manure and urine, onto the soil. So again, we want this microbiome to be very similar. And what we look for what we call biological hotspots in any pasture, any field, any farm, anywhere. Even in the desert, we can find biological hotspots, and we focus on those first. So in other words, if you're wanting to make dramatic improvements, regenerative improvements on your farm or on your ranch, search around that farm, that ranch for biological hotspots. And I'm going to show you what some of these look like in just a moment. That's the low-hanging fruit. And work there first and grow that biology out. You'll frustrate yourself very heavily if you try to focus on the worst areas of your farm first, because you have the lowest level of biology and you have nothing to grow out. So again, work on the best areas first and grow them out into the worst areas of the farm. So here's an example of biological hotspots. All of these pictures were taken in the desert. These were taken in the high mountain desert of Colorado, in western Colorado, in New Mexico, and in Mexico, in the Chihuahuan Desert. And so there's several types of biological hotspots. Number one, look at the manure pads. Look at what's happening in the desert immediately around these manure pads. You see new life, new plant growth springing up, vibrant, springing up around that manure pad, even in the middle of the desert. That is a mini biological hotspot. So the closer we can get these manure pads in the desert or even on our own farms, here in a more temperate zone, the closer we can get them through higher stock density, every manure pad creates immediately, and every urine spot creates a biological hotspot. The closer we can get them together, the quicker we grow this biology into each other, and the quicker we make overall improvement. Now, if you look on the bottom right, you'll see a picture again in the desert, and you see in the foreground a lot of grass growing. Then if you look back in the distance, it opens up to a lot of bare soil. Where you see the grass growing in the desert, that is a biological hotspot. And we can take that and we can grow it out all around it, again, like the ripple effect in a pond. Now, dung beetles are very powerful creatures. We definitely want these working for us on our farms and on our ranches. They are nature's tool for rapidly breaking down manure pats and reincorporating all of that fertility back into the soil. Now, in the process of doing that, they not only make the soil more fertile and enhance the mineral cycle and water cycle in the soil, but the activity of the dung beetles, by much more rapidly breaking down a manure pat, basically stops the parasite cycle. So the fly eggs and the internal parasite larvae that are in this manure pat die because of the activity of the dung beetles. So you have effective stopping of the parasite cycle, both internal and external. Now, why do a lot of us not have dung beetles anymore? One simple reason: chemical dewormers. Chemical dewormers. Chemical dewormers are deadly on dung beetles. Particularly, the worst of them are the ivermectins, and that's the dewormer that most people favor. Ivermectins are absolutely deadly on dewormers, and you'll have practically no dung beetles if you use an ivermectins routinely. However, all of the chemical dewormers adversely affect dung beetles, some more so, some a little less so. So we need to get away from using chemical dewormers. We can easily do that. We do it, and many others do it as well in terms of not using them. And on our website at Understanding Ag, we have an article on there that I published called 6 Steps to Parasite Control. And I think the lead-in on article says, don't let it bug you, 6 Steps to Parasite Control. But you can find that under our resources tab and our blogs on our website. And it covers 6 different ways that you can eliminate the use of chemical dewormers and use other means to control internal and external parasites. Now, if you look at this video, look at the job that these dung beetles are doing, and then look at all the other life. You've got butterflies and everything else all over this manure pat. This is only a 2-day-old manure pat. The dung beetles have completely dried it out and are incorporating it directly into the soil. There is not a chance for a fly larva or internal parasite larva to still be existing in there. They're done for. These dung beetles took care of that parasite problem for us. Now, this is showing the power of rest. This is in north of Grand Junction, Colorado, one of our clients' ranches. This is a 500,000 acre ranch, and this is up in the high mountain region of the ranch, where they've got a lot of alpine type meadows that are grazed. When we first stepped foot on this ranch, they were conventionally grazing without any adaptive grazing, and they were overgrazing almost every area of the ranch. And this high alpine meadow right next to an alpine lake was overgrazed. And you can see what it looks like, overgrazed and not rested. The first thing that we did was we removed the cattle, allowed a long rest period, and then you can see what it looks like. This is after a graze, after the rest, and the recovery after the graze. So you can see it's dramatically different than what it was before, because one of the rules of disruption, remember, was extended rest, alter rest period. That's exactly what we did, and we had a staggering result. We counted more than 6 new plant species from the prior year to the next year that was growing in here just because of the extended rest, and significantly greater biomass. There was almost 3.5 times more biomass production growing because we introduced the disruption of rest. So where do you start? Here, you know, this is that high mountain desert north of Grand Junction, Colorado. And if you look at this picture, you've got very, very little growing under the brush, very little. So we got creosote here and greasewood and some mesquite and things like that. And you've got very little growing. So there's no biological hot spots here, excuse me. But just 100 yards away, the exact same ranch 100 yards away, look at the grass that is growing here. So this is where you start. You don't try to repair this first. This will severely disappoint you because there's no biology to draw from to begin with. You start here and grow it into that other area. Again, like a ripple effect in a pond. So identify the areas of biology and grow them into each other. So let's talk briefly about getting grazing started right each year on our spring grazing. So do not overgraze in the spring. Too many people rush getting their cattle out to pastures first thing in the spring, and they'll overgraze them first thing in the spring. And that impacts your forage production potential for the entire rest of the year. Okay, so do not make that mistake. Either have stockpile that you have stockpiled from the previous year that you're going to graze first in the spring, and that I highly advise that, or hold them off just a little longer until you get a lot more growth on that spring flush before you start grazing it. Don't get over anxious, because again, if you do, you're going to pay for it in lowered production for the entire rest of the year, and you can't put enough fertilizer on it to make up for that loss. You just simply can't. The other thing in the spring is keep your livestock moving rapidly. Don't let them camp or park on any one paddock or pasture. Move them, move them, move them every day, every day, every day. Keep them moving. This is more important in the spring. It's important all year, but it's much more important in the spring. In the spring, proper rest and recovery of plants and plant roots, again, is critically important, because again, you're setting the stage for them to be able to perform for the entire rest of the grazing season. And also remember that how you graze last fall and winter will have a significant impact on the next grazing season, no doubt about it. So don't make the mistake that a lot of people make that think, well, I'm in winter now, or I'm in late fall, and grass is not going to grow in the winter anyway. So I'm just going to graze it all down to the ground. I'm going to take all that I can get. That is an enormous mistake. You just like you don't want to take too much in the active growing season, you don't want to take too much in the dormant. You need to leave enough plant residue on top of the soil and root growth in the ground to support that plant all the way through the winter and support the soil microbes through the winter, so that when spring hits again and soil temperatures start warming up, they can become active much quicker, and you can start your grazing season earlier, that growth a lot earlier. The other thing is that leaving enough residue acts as an insulator from winter temperatures. And if you graze it all the way to the ground, you have just removed all your insulation. Remember, insulation works equally well in the summer and the winter. In the winter, it keeps your ground warmer. In the summer, that extra residue keeps your ground cooler. That's what you want to do, both winter and summer, leave more residue. We like to stockpile a lot of summer forages and so forth and graze those through the winter. And we love to leave at least one or two stockpile pastures for the very first graze in the spring. They'll have a mix of both old and new growth in them. And that's the perfect combination to keep your cattle from being very runny and from consuming too much protein in those early spring pastures. So again, we want at least 4 fully formed leaves, ideally on those plants in the springtime before we start that grazing process. And another thing that I want to point out, and then we're going to go to case studies, is the amount of plant that you allow your livestock to remove on any single grazing event. If you look at these two charts here, if we allow them to remove up to 50% of the leaf volume in any one grazing event, we have no more than 2 to 4% root growth stoppage. Okay, pay attention to that. Now look at what happens if we go up, if we jump just 10%. If we go from 50 to allow them to take 60% of the leaf volume of the plants out there, we've gone from 2 to 4% root growth stoppage to 50%. That quick. It makes that much difference. Now, to our eye, with us visually looking at it, we're like, what in the world kind of difference can that make? Well, you see it right here, okay? Right here. That's what kind of difference it makes. And if you allow them to take 80%, you now have 100% root growth stoppage. So this is important. Please pay attention to this and keep this in mind when you're grazing. Then if you look over on the right-hand side of the slide, you again see that if we allow them to graze too much, we get negative compounding and cascading effects. Our soil temperature will heat up, we'll lose a lot of moisture, our microbes will die back or go in a metabolic sleep and quit functioning. So we lose water cycle, we lose mineral cycle, our roots die off. So the only living portion of the root is much closer to the soil surface. So then if we turn off hot and dry, then it's going to take a lot longer for that pasture to recover and to be grazable again. Our soil aggregate collapses. So even though we may desperately need a rain at that point for pasture recovery, when it does get a rain, it cannot infiltrate all of that rain or even 50% of that rain because the soil aggregate has just collapsed because we lost our biology. So in the top side of that slide, A, with improper grazing, we have a lot of very negative compounding effects that are going to impact us not just for a week or two, but the entire rest of the grazing season and maybe even into the next year, depending on how severely we impact it. But on B, if we allow them to take no more than about 50%, and on our grazes, we don't take more than 30 to 40% on a single grazing event and then move them forward. But if you allow them to take up to 50%, you can see that you have a whole host of positive compounding and cascading effects. You don't lose soil moisture. You don't have your soil temperature heat up and disrupt the mineral cycle and the water cycle. You don't have your microbes going into a metabolic sleep. You don't have significant die-off of your roots so they can continue to function and produce exudates and receive minerals from the soil microbes and the mycorrhizal fungi. You do not have a collapse of your soil aggregate. So every time it rains, you can infiltrate a lot more of that rainfall. So these two charts are really critically important. Please just burn them into your mind. And again, I can make this whole slide set available as well, but really pay attention to that. Now I'm going to transition into case studies. So let's look at some real life examples. We talked all morning about the 6 principles, the 4 ecosystem processes, and the 3 rules. What happens when we appropriately apply them? So I love this comic strip here. I'm a big comic strip reader, have been ever since I was a child, and I still read the comics every single day. It's sort of my release for the day. And I love this particular one, BC. So BC and Pete are out walking, looking at the sun, and BC says, imagine the amount of energy that thing emits. And Pete says, yeah, species as advanced as ours will one day amass sufficient knowledge to harness it. And the tree is over here, and Pete and BC talking about this, and the tree just says, amateurs. So we as humans manufacture solar panels, right? And we've got solar panel fence chargers, and we've got solar panel pumps and solar panels we can put on our houses and solar farms and all these other things. But the truth is, the ability of those solar panels to harness the energy of the sun is nowhere near the ability of the plants that are growing out there to harness the energy of the sun. So the more leaf material we can grow and maintain in our fields and in our pastures, and the more diverse the leaf architecture. We need different shapes of leaves out in our pastures, therefore different species and functional groups. The more we can produce different species and greater diversity in leaf shape and architecture, the better the photosynthetic process works. So let's look first. We're going to go to 3 or 4 very distinctly different regions of North America, because I want you to see that no matter where you're at, no matter the climate that, or the region, that the 6 principles of 4 ecosystem processes and the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship work and work equally well. So let's go to central North Dakota and look at a 4-farm comparison. These are 4 neighboring farms. So I want you to note that. Farm number 1, a certified organic operation. Very diverse in its cropping system. They grow a lot of different crops, use manures as a fertilizer, as you would anticipate, but they don't plant any cover crops in between their cash crops, and they don't have any livestock. So they don't graze any livestock. This is what their soil looks like. This is a shovel test. This is what we want you to do with the shovel. When I mentioned the shovel test earlier, look at this soil. Very crusted on top, a deep crusted layer, 1/4 inch or so deep, heavily plated soil, heavily compacted. And look at the roots growing laterally, okay? That's not a good soil, folks. Not a good soil at all. So, but this is a certified organic farm. So how can they not have good soil? It's because being certified organic alone does not confer soil health upon a farm. You've got to actually implement the 6-4-3, 6 principles, 4 ecosystem processes, 3 rules. So even organic farms can have severely degraded soil, as you see here. Farm number 2, no-till. Okay, so they got to be good. They're no-till, right? All right. But low diversity in their crops, only plant 2 crops, use a lot of anhydrous ammonia. Crop yields are average for the area. They're not planting any cover crops, and they're not using any livestock. Take a look at their soil. A little darker, actually, not much, but a little darker than the organic farm soil, but still heavily crusted on top and heavily plated, and roots growing laterally. So again, we've got an issue here with this soil. It's not a highly functional soil. It's a degraded soil. Farm number 3, long-term no-till, 20 years no-till. So this one's got to be good. They've been in no-till 20 years. Medium diversity, but they use a lot of synthetics. They use a lot of synthetic fertilizers. They use fungicides, pesticides, insecticides, all these other things. But again, they're not incorporating cover crops and no livestock. And this is what their soil looks like. This is the worst of the 3. And they're a 20-year no-till. Heavily, heavily plated, extreme lateral root growth, very heavy crusted layer on top, very poor water infiltration, no aggregates. You know, this is terrible soil, and yet it's a 20-year no-till. Now, let's take a look at farm number 4. No-till since 1993, diverse in their cash crop rotation, but farm 4 does plant cover crops every year after the cash crops, and not just a monoculture cover crop, but very diverse or complex cover crop mixes. They have used 0 synthetic fertilizers since 2007, and they also fully integrate livestock on the grazing these cover crops, and not just cattle, but they're also grazing sheep and pigs and putting laying hens, all that out onto the cover crops. This is what the soil in farm 4 looks like. This is what healthy soil looks like. You see very highly aggregated soil. You see all those little, it looks like black cottage cheese. black cheese curds, that's soil aggregates, okay? That's a very healthy soil. Deep, dark color, so it's high in carbon, like a healthy soil should be. And it's not just high in carbon up near the soil surface. It carries on down deep. And the aggregate layer carries on down deep. You don't see lateral root growth, you see vertical root growth. You see earthworms here. So we've got signs of all types of life here. The microbes are functioning like they need to function, especially the mycorrhizal fungi, as evidenced by the soil aggregates. This is what we're looking for. So let's look at some data, okay? So if we look at Haney test results from the 4 farms, we find that the first 3, even though they were very different from each other, do not have any appreciable differences in their NPK and water extractable organic carbon. None, none. They're virtually the same, very, very close to the same in all 3 of those measurements, or all 4 of those measurements, excuse me. So they're, even though they're different, one certified organic, one 5-year no-till, the other 20-year no-till, didn't make a difference. Why? Because they were not incorporating all 6 of the soil health principles. You can't pick and choose your principles. You can't do that and be successful. If you want to be successful at regenerative agriculture and building soil health, you've got to incorporate all 6 principles, folks, all 6. If you're picking and choosing, you're not going to be very successful. And this is why a lot of people say regenerative agriculture does not work, because they're cherry picking. They're only picking 1 or 2 or at the most 3 of the principles and applying those and forgetting the rest. Just will not work. But look what happens, farm 4. If you implement all 6 of the soil health principles consistently, look at the available NPK and water extractable organic carbon. Far, far better and above the others. Not even a comparison here. So we've got a distinct difference. And by the way, farm number 4 is Gabe Brown's farm. So just so that you know. Now, let's look at other measures. Okay, so let's look at organic matter and water infiltration rates. So again, all 4 are direct neighbors, next door neighbors. They all have the same soil type. They all started at the same organic matter and same water infiltration rates, including Gabe's. He started down in the 1.5, 1.6 organic matter range in the 1/2 inch or so infiltration rate per hour, okay? But look at the difference now. On the first 3, again, practically no difference in their organic matter and their water infiltration rates. They're all pretty bad. But look at what's happening on farm 4. Organic matter has increased from the mid-1s all the way up to right at 7. And we've now measured soils on Gabe's farm that are over 11% organic matter that started below 2% just 20 years ago. And then look at water infiltration rates. Again, the first 3 farms, when they get a rain, they don't get an inch. An inch may fall, but that inch does not infiltrate. So on their farms, an inch of rain is not an inch of rain. An inch of irrigation water applied is not an inch. On Gabe's farm, look what happens. His infiltration rates are at 20+ inches an hour. An inch of rain on Gabe's farm is an inch of rain. He not only gets it, but he keeps it. His neighbors do not keep it. It runs off and it evaporates off. Now, one of these farms is uphill from Gabe's farm. Gabe also gets the benefit of capturing their rainfall because of their runoff. It runs off onto his farm. He'll infiltrate it. Their neighbors don't. That's why Gabe gets it, because they're not infiltrating. Gabe is. This is important, very important, if we want our farms and our soils to be highly functional. Mississippi farm. So again, a very, very different location in the country. So went from cold northern North Dakota down to the hot, humid South here in Mississippi. 2009, this is what the farm looked like. Very beat up, very degraded. This was in I took these pictures in the fall of 2009. So what we did the first winter, cattle were placed on the first winter, and we went in and took measurements to get our baseline. Soil organic matters is about 1,000 acres in that farm. Soil organic matters range from 1.3 to 1.6. Water infiltration rates were less than a ½ inch an hour at multiple locations around the farm. Plant bricks was averaging only 2%. Mississippi State University extension personnel came out and estimated there were only 3 to 4 major forage, what they call major forage species out there. And it took 6+ acres to support a single cow. So that's the beginning. So the first winter, we implemented some strategic bale grazing, and I'll talk about that a little later. We implemented adaptive grazing, high stock density, short duration grazing with long rest periods. And what we did not do over the next several years is as important as what we did do. We did not apply any fertilizer. We did not plant any seed. We did not mow, and we did not spray. None of that. Our tools were cattle, water, temporary fencing. That's it. No other tools, no other expenses. Okay. So this is bale grazing the first winter. And you can see we had extremely high density, up to between 500,000 and 1 million pounds per acre on the bale grazing. Bales were placed about every 25 to 30 foot apart in a checkerboard fashion in a single strand of polywire, controlling the movement of those cattle from one row of bales to the next. So again, we use this to rapidly build new organic matter, new carbon, and new fertility. This is the very first spring after that. And you can see that we had every weed known to man growing here. Okay. I mean, you name it. It was, you know, in the deep South, we can grow a whole bunch of weeds. And we were doing just that. So we had very, very weedy pastures that first spring. But you know what? Under high density, these cattle learned to eat every single thing growing out there. And by golly, they did. They ate everything from ragweed to giant ragweed to pigweed to sumac to thistle. I mean, you name it, dog fennel, whatever was out there, they were eating it. Now, this was back in, again, I think this was spring of 2010, but those 4 little boys there, at that time, that's my youngest son at that time, and again, 2010, and these were 3 of my grandboys. And those 4 little boys could build polywire paddocks and move cattle. So there's no excuses for us, folks. These 4 little boys could take that machine right there and go out every day and by themselves string polywire and build a polywire paddock and move them darn cows. So if we think we don't have time and this is too much trouble and too much effort, I'm going to have to beg your pardon on that one, because if 4 little boys can do that, we as grown-up adults can dang sure do it. And it didn't take them long at all. This was not an all-day deal, folks. And we'll show some of that in a minute. I mean, at most 400 to 500 cows, 30 minutes a day to build a paddock and move. That's all it takes. Now, you know what other reason 4 little boys, or and I think even 4 little girls would do this? You give them a machine like that, and they'll do about anything to be able to play with a machine like that. So, so again, you know, they love being able to do things. This is what the paddocks look like when the cattle would come out. You could see that on the ironweed and giant ragweed and things like that, they would strip the leaves off of those. Okay. So they would eat all those leaves, and then you see a high degree of trample there, no bare ground. We didn't want any bare ground at any point in time, but we wanted a high degree of trample, a lot of residue covering the ground. So year 2, this is what it looked like. So we already see a succession and a transition in what's growing out here. Year 3, we see yet another succession of what's growing here. Year 4, so you can see steady progress in plant species, in the density of the biomass it's growing, it just got better and better. Very easy to move the cattle, one person and a buggy. This is a 2-mile move. They just follow the buggy across the entire 2 miles, and they don't stop until you stop. And then when you stop, they know that this is the next paddock you want to move them into. So very easy for one person to handle. This is a herd of 700 head. It's being moved by one person on a buggy without any problem over a distance of 2 miles. This is stockpiled prairie in Northeast Mississippi in the Black Belt Prairie. There's a lot of summer annuals in here, or summer perennials, excuse me, as you can tell. And we stockpile this and graze this in the winter months. And it does very well for grazing in the winter months. So this is stockpile prairie in the fall. And then this is January, turning the cows onto the stockpile to graze. So again, not having to feed hay, you're out there grazing the stockpile in the middle of the winter. This is in February. This was a year, you know, a lot of winters. We can have extremely wet winters in the deep south. This was one of the, I think it was 2 winters, maybe 3 winters ago. Extremely wet winter. We had, where we were, we had more than 35 inches of rain from December through March. And it just stayed incredibly wet. But we had a lot of stockpile built up. This is a low-lying pasture, So I wanted you to see this. Under density, this was at about 50 to 60,000 pound stock density. Under density, these cattle were grazing this low-lying wet pasture, the stockpile, and not pugging it up, not messing it up, because we still had a lot of biology active and a lot of aggregate there. So this is resilience that is built through regenerative practices. Our neighbors, when they tried to graze any of their fields, they just completely mudded and mucked them up. And we didn't have any mud or muck. So here's the progress. In 4 years, this is a 4-year synopsis, okay? So soil organic matter in 4 years went from the mid 1s to the low 5s. Forage species, we had the same forage agronomist come out, and instead of 3 to 4, they told us we now had 43, including a lot of natives growing there from the latent seed bank. They thought we planted the natives, and we did not. So, and they still don't believe that we didn't plant the natives, but they estimated we have 43 viable grazable species growing in just 4 years. Plant bricks went from 2% to over 15%. Water infiltration rates from under a ½ inch an hour to over 30 inches an hour in 4 years. Stocking rate from taking 6 acres per cow down to 1.5 acres per cow. I call that gaining free acres. Acres I didn't have to buy or pay additional taxes or insurance on, or spend any money on infrastructure on. They were acres that existed there all the time, right under my feet. We just made the same acres far more productive. The second one, another region of the country, Eastern North Carolina, coastal plains, very sandy soils. And does that look sandy to you? It doesn't, does it? But these are very sandy soils. But this is what regeneration will do to sandy soils. And this is Adam Grady's farm. That's Adam holding his own soil there. We did the shovel test, and that's Adam holding his soil. Look at all the earthworms. Look at the aggregates. This is really, really good coastal plain soil. They farmed 1,200 acres, well, now more than that, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. At this time, 1,200 acres, livestock and row crops. Adam's the 10th generation. Farm's been in their family since the 1780s. There's 4 generations that are living on the farm today, 4 living generations on the farm. They were very conventional in their practices until the fall of 2016, when they met us and started talking to us about regenerative agriculture and started trying some of this stuff. So what they did, they were very conventional grazers. They switched to adaptive grazing. They had commercial swine production, but they put pigs out on pasture. And they started planting green, planting cover crops and planting green. So Adam is now planting, he's doing a lot of roll down, and he's planting his corn and soybeans and all of that into this roll down, cover crop, complex cover crop roll down, and having a very high level of success doing this. And here's an example of that. This was in 2018. Adam and his neighbor, these two fields, I took these pictures May the 30th, 2018. These two fields are directly side by side. I can step from Adam's field directly into his neighbor's field, okay? Both of them planted the same week, the first week of April. They planted their corn, side by side fields, okay? Keep that in mind. These fields don't have a distance between them. Side by side. They planted the first week in April. They had a ton of rain in April and quite a bit in May. And his neighbor's corn crop failed. It drowned out because his neighbor is very conventional, full tillage, no cover crops, no livestock, high synthetic use, and his corn drowned because his soil won't infiltrate water. No aggregate. So it drowned out. This picture is of the replant. That's a replanted crop. So his neighbor had to spend twice the money on seed. He had to plant it all again. Adam didn't have to plant again at all. So this is May the 30th, both corn crops. Look at Adam's, look at his neighbor's. Stark difference. Look closely at the neighbor's field on May the 30th. What do you see out in that field? First of all, you see a lot of bare ground. And secondly, you see pools of water, ponding water all out there. When I walked through that field that day, May the 30th, my boots got very muddy. I went into Adam's field, no mud, no standing water, because he's got aggregate and it immediately soaks that rainfall in. They're both dry land. At the end of the year, Adam yielded 189 bushels per acre dry land, his neighbor 134 bushels per acre. Now, but that's not the rest. That's not the rest of the story. If y'all remember Paul Harvey, there was always the rest of the story. Well, here it is. So not only did Adam yield more, but Adam only put 25% of the fertilizer on his corn that his neighbor did. Adam reduced his fertility applications by 75%. He had a very low herbicide application on this corn, a quarter rate, and only one, and that was it. He put out no fungicides and no insecticides for the entire year. So and he had far fewer passes. His neighbor had a lot more passes through his field than Adam did. And every pass cost you at least $20 to $25 an acre. So Adam not only yielded quite a bit more than his neighbor, but he spent a lot less than his neighbor to get that lot more production. And this was in only his second full year of regenerative ag practices. That's important to note as well. So in that same year though, so 2018, okay, September of 2018, after he harvested his corn in August, in September, Hurricane Florence hit. And if any of y'all remember Florence, she was a pretty nasty hurricane. She was very slow moving, and she dumped tons and tons of rain on North Carolina and on Adam and all of his neighbors. So this is September the 13th, the day that Florence made landfall. The power had already been knocked out. This is the next day. You can see Adam's farm is already started. This is Adam's farm. It's already starting to flood. And by afternoon, you can see the flood waters were very high. These are old. He used to also grow commercial turkeys. He raises turkeys on pasture now, but these are his old commercial turkey houses. You can see the water's all the way up to the eaves of his old turkey houses. This building is floating, the white building there, and you can see the winds ripped off a lot of tin off of his old turkey houses. This is the next morning, and you can see the flood waters are still pretty high. He was taking these pictures. That's the wake of his boat. He was taking these pictures from his boat. These are his old tobacco sheds. They used to grow a lot of tobacco. This is his father's house. You can see the flood water starting to encroach on his father's house. And then finally, after 4 days, you can start seeing floodwaters receding. And by the 6th day, 7th day, he could get around on a tractor. This was before the hurricane. That's his 7-year-old son standing in the soybeans. He had one heck of a soybean crop, and they would have been an excellent yielding crop. I was there right then when he took this picture, and we were looking at his pod formation and bean formation and all of that. It was going to be a very high yielding crop. But this is what 8 to 9 foot of floodwaters across the farm will do to soybeans. That's what they look like after the hurricane. So it killed, he harvested all of his corn ahead of the hurricane, but he lost 100% of his soybean crop to the hurricane. Remember the pastures that he was grazing? Whoops, that's what they look like after the floodwaters. So he lost his entire soybean crop, and all of his pastures were turned completely brown. So all was lost, right? It's going to be a tough winter, really tough winter. Killed everything, nothing to graze, flooded out all his hay. What are you going to do? This is what he did. He had built resilience, the power of biological resilience. He had built resilience here through regenerative practices. 2 weeks, I took these pictures as well. 2 weeks after the floodwaters receded, he was able to get his tractors and no-till drills back onto his land and drill in complex covers. Just 2 weeks. His neighbors saw him doing this, tried to get into their fields, sunk their tractor to its axle. Okay? They had no idea how Adam was able to get into his fields. They were just astounded. As a matter of fact, they kept telling him that your fields are so compacted. That's what allowed you to get into your fields. And as a matter of fact, it was the exact opposite. His fields were so aggregated. That's why he could get in there. I took these 2 pictures just barely 2 weeks over after he planted the cover crop. That it just exploded out of the ground after the flood because of the biological resilience. And he had grazing all winter long, whereas his neighbors did not. So 3-year progress for Adam Grady at Dark Branch Farm. In just year 2, on 1,200 acres, he saved $200,000 in input cost. In year 3, he paid off all of his farm debt and purchased another farm, paying all cash. By the way, in year 4, he bought yet another farm, a 3rd farm. He's planting all non-GM crops, no genetically modified crops anymore, and he's selling to buyers that are paying him a premium for non-GM crops. He's no longer using any neonicotinoid seed treatment on any of his seed, none. No seed treatments of any kind. As a matter of fact, he uses no fungicides, no insecticides, minimal herbicide, And he's been able to cut his synthetic fertilizer use by 75 to 80% already. So pretty phenomenal progress, but Adam's not an anomaly. He's one of many that have been able to do this. Grant and Dawn Bright-Crutes, Redwood Falls, Minnesota, cow-calf and crops. Grant built this for interseeding cover crops into a standing corn at the V2 to V4 stage. And he can just ride right over the corn and interseed his complex cover crops. And this is what it looks like after planting. And then this is what it looks like in the fall after the corn is dried down. The cover crops just explode. And so shortly after harvest, he's got a cover crop ready for grazing. We had a field day out there at the end of November, a couple of years ago. And it was for a southern country boy. It was freezing cold to me. They were 11 degrees. And we took a backhoe and dug this soil pit, and we had a field day, and it was 11 degrees. We were all out there, about 80 farmers out there on an 11-degree day having a field day up in Minnesota. Imagine that. But look at what we found. He had 4 hard freezes already, and it was 11 degrees that day for the high. And here's what we found. Look at the green still in his cover crop. And we found living roots, this deep. Also, one thing I want you to note here, you see on the left-hand side, this trench. Do you see that yellow clay type soil down there? 15 years ago, that's what he was farming. That's what his topsoil was. That's what he was farming. In 15 years, he's built 20 inches of new soil on top of that old B horizon soil that he was originally farming. And we've documented this even through the university there. So he has built 20 plus inches there. Pretty incredible. This is what we can do. And we actually published an article titled Healthy Soil Grows Up Too. Not just grows down, but grows up. So Grant and Dawn are literally standing 20 foot higher on their farm today, or 20 inches higher, on their farm today than they were just 15 years ago. Again, living roots in the ground on an 11-degree day after 4 hard freezes. And then look what it looked like over top. So he had a lot of biomass to feed his cattle through the winter, following his summer cash crop, that corn crop that he harvested there. And if you want to know the power, the economic power of grazing cover crops, take a look at this, okay? 107 head of grass finishing steers and heifers grazing this particular cover crop plot for 32 days. It was a 35-acre plot, 35 acres of cover crops right here that they were grazing. They grazed it for 32 days. They average right at 4 pounds a day, average daily gain. Now, if we look at all the cost, okay, their gross profit, 107 head, 32 days, 4 pounds a day, average daily gain, and valuing it at that point in time at $1.10 per pound, their gross profit was $436 an acre. Now let's add in and deduct all the costs, seed costs, the seeding costs, labor, land, all of that, $164 an acre. Net profit for 32 days of grazing a cover crop of $271 an acre. That's double cropping. They made a profit off of their cash crop, then planted the cover crop, grazed the cover crop, and made another $271 an acre net profit in just 32 days of grazing a cover crop. Why are we not doing this, folks? Why? This is there for the taking for anybody. Okay, let's go to a fourth place. Again, distinctly different. Let's go all the way down to the Chihuahuan Desert of Mexico. In the Chihuahuan Desert, they get less than 8 inches of rain annually. They have a short 2 to 3 month rainy season and then a 9 to 10 month dry season where they get practically no rain whatsoever. Temperatures in the summer can soar to more than 105 degrees routinely. And a lot of the ranches down there require between 200 and 300 acres per cow. Now, that's probably not fathomable to most of you, but think about that. Probably there's people here today that your farms aren't 300 acres in size. They're under that. Well, if you were in the Chihuahuan Desert, you could run one cow on your farm. If you have a 200 acre farm, a 300 acre farm, you can run one cow. Think about that. That's what most ranchers are running down there. So here's the Chihuahuan Desert. It extends from southwestern Texas, southern New Mexico, southeastern Arizona, down into the states of Sonora, Chihuahua, and Coahuila. And we're working in every one of these regions in the US and in Mexico with ranchers who are making an enormous difference on their ranches using regenerative practices in this, what we would call an abject desert. This is what it looks like. You can drive El Paso to Las Cruces or head south across the border and drive for the next 4 hours south. And this is what you'll see, mile after monotonous, boring mile. This is all you see. Now, do you understand why it takes 200 to 300 acres to support a single cow? That's what this desert looks like. Historical ecological perspective, it was not like that 400 years ago, 500 years ago. This was a vibrant, thriving grassland. But now it's like this. It started with the abuse from the early Spanish explorers and then carried on through to others that migrated into this territory. And because this was already a lower rainfall area, it didn't take long for them to destroy it and to turn it into the desert. See, we think this is what it's always looked like. And that is totally, totally false, totally incorrect. So in all the Permian Basin was once a thriving grassland supporting huge herds of bison, elk, antelope, deer, grizzly, mountain lion, wolf, beaver, otter, all of that used to thrive in this region. We have the historical records to document that. So just like Andre Voissan said, overgrazing and understocking led to this desertification. This is Alejandro Correa. Alejandro is one of our regenerative ranchers in the state of Chihuahua, and he also is a member of our Understanding Ag team. This is not Alejandro's ranch that he's walking on here. This is his direct next door neighbor's ranch. I'm going to show you a lot of side-by-side comparisons here, Alejandro and his neighbor. To get to Alejandro's ranch, we drive more than 40 miles on a dirt road through his neighbor's ranch before we get to Alejandro's ranch. So we are seeing this for 40 miles, driving through the neighbor's ranch. So again, this is what it looks like on the neighbor's ranch. And his neighbor is requiring very close to 300 acres to support a single cow. This is a canyon in the Chihuahuan Desert that did not take 1,000,000 years to carve. It did not take 10,000 years to carve. It did not take 1,000 years to carve. And it did not take 100 years to carve. This is after 40 to 50 years. Less than 8 inches of rain, severe erosion in the desert. How do we know this? Well, first of all, the eyewitness testimony of those that grew up right here. But secondly, this picture, and we've got many more like it. This The person standing near the bottom here is Juan Pablo Almeida. He's another one of our regenerative ranchers. You see the barbed wire fence suspended way above his head and the fence posts suspended way above his head. There used to be rangeland above his head, way above his head. That was the fence. That was one of the fences. It's now suspended in midair. Now, another thing I want you to note, there's evidence that this once was a thriving grassland. Look at the side of the canyon on the upper left-hand side of this picture. What do you see? You see a dark layer, much darker, from the soil surface down 4 to 5 feet, right? And it's pretty consistent, consistently dark. That's carbon. That's a carbon layer. It's consistently 4 to 5 feet deep. That was because it was a thriving grassland. It had incredible growth there. And then look at how deep some of these roots grew. Look in the middle of the picture. Look at this, the carbon trails going all the way down more than 20 feet, okay? That's a carbon trail from roots. And look at all the other carbon trails on the side of this canyon from the roots of plants that used to exist there, used to grow there. Guys, 40, 50 years to create a canyon like this in the desert under 8 inches of rain. Okay, it doesn't take a lot of rain to create severe erosion when you have nothing holding the soil together and you have no aggregate. So again, just showing this up close, dark, consistent carbon layer, and then the carbon trails from roots going down much deeper. We talked about earlier biological hotspots. This is on the Las Damas Ranch. Alejandro's ranch is the Las Damas. And we identify the hotspots, biological hotspots, concentrate our cattle here, and look what happens. So keep this picture in mind. And then a year later, look at that. In the desert, no irrigation, no fertilizer, no seeds planted, nothing but cattle and water and movement, daily movement. Go from here, this biological hotspot, to this, totally grassed in, okay? This is Shane New, one of my partners in Understanding Ag down at the Las Damas. This is in February. In the desert, look at the density of growth here. Remember those earlier pictures I showed you of the abject desert? Does this look like the same desert? Look at this, you know, a lot of density of growth. Again, this is what the desert typically looks like, but this is what is happening on the Las Damas. And again, no seeds were planted. Every bit of this came up from the latent seed bank. So can the desert be transformed? We'll take a look. This is the Las Damas today. Does this look like the Chihuahuan Desert? This looks like we're in eastern Nebraska somewhere. Yeah, I mean, this is vibrant. Over on the right, this is Alejandro's 85-year-old father. His father says he's never seen the desert bloom like this in his lifetime. He never believed that the desert could look like this. And Alejandro says this is what's keeping his father alive today, that he wants so much to continue to see the progress that he's just overjoyed with what's happening here. Look down here at the bottom left, the mesquite. You remember this spindly mesquite right here, all this spindly mesquite, okay? Look at what the mesquite looks like on Alejandro's ranch. Strong, vigorous, producing a lot of fruit for wildlife and livestock. Again, look at this sea of grass on the Las Damas Ranch. Absolutely incredible. And this is what we're seeing on many ranches in the desert now, implementing regenerative practices. We do a lot of workshops down in Mexico, a lot of soil health academies. This is part of our group. Look at the density. This is in June Look at the density of growth, again, here in the desert in all of these pictures. We also don't worry about all these woody species, the creosote, the greasewood, the mesquite, the grass. Look at the middle picture. The grass outcompetes it. The grass chokes out the woodies. So we're not worried about these woodies at all. We're not bulldozing them out. We're not cutting them out. We're not spraying them out. We're doing nothing but growing grass and letting the grass outcompete them. Now, this is the summer of 2018 in the Chihuahuan Desert. They got a grand total of 6 inches of rain for their rainy season. That was it, 6 inches for the whole year. This is Alejandro's neighbor's ranch after that 6 inch of rain. Okay. This is Alejandro's ranch after the same 6 inches of rain. Why? Why this difference? Well, it's plain to see. It truly is in plain sight. Look at the soil here on the neighbor's ranch. Cracked, crusted, heavily plated, heavily compacted, no roots to create channels in the soil, no aggregate to create channels in the soil. His neighbor got 6 inches, but he didn't keep 6 inches. He didn't even come close to infiltrating 6 inches. It evaporated off and ran off. Alejandro infiltrated and kept the 6 inches. Alejandro now says he doesn't matter. He doesn't care whether he gets 6 inches, 8 inches, 10 inches of rain. It doesn't matter. He can keep whatever rain he does get and grow grass. So he doesn't wish he gets 20 inches of rain a year. He says, I can grow all the grass I need with 8 inches of rain a year. How many of you today, if all you got was 8 to 10 inches of rain, can grow grass? What would your farms look like with only 8 to 10 inches of rain for an entire year? They would look like the Chihuahuan Desert. We've got to be able to infiltrate and keep the rain. So they also make no excuses. They've got some very rugged, go up into the Sierra Madre range, very, very rugged territory up there. They're adaptively grazing that under single strand polywire and tread in post. They make zero excuses. Again, you know, we want to make all kinds of excuses about why we cannot do this. These guys make zero excuses. You see this Energizer on the platform there with the solar panel? You know how it got there? On the back of a mule, and not a Kawasaki mule, but a real live four-legged mule, okay? So they make no excuses here. They use anything they can to hold post or to attach their polywire to. A pile of rocks to hold a post down. Look at this, a yucca plant, using it as a post. Rocks to hold their post down. No excuses whatsoever. They just simply get the job done. Now, here's what has happened. So to date, Alejandro has been able to increase his net revenue by 350%. They are growing 4.5 times the forage biomass. They've increased their cow numbers by 2.5 times and added quite a few sheep to the ranch. I think close to over 500 ewes, maybe close to 1,000 now. And they've seen a significant increase in birds and other wildlife, including 2 endangered species, the piping plover and Sprague's pipit. So they are now a wildlife sanctuary beyond being a regenerative ranch. Now let's look at why this is possible. Now we have quite a bit of evidence that corroborates that they are literally changing their weather on their ranch. This is cloud formation over the Las Damas. Look at this, neighbor's ranch over here, Las Damas over here to the right. Look at where the thunderclouds are forming. Look at this. This is the Pritas Ranch in Chihuahua. Fence line comparison, folks. Again, Pictures don't lie. Neighbor's ranch on the right, the Peritas on the left. Look at where it's raining, almost right down the fence line. It's stopping at the fence, guys. And we're seeing this over and over and over again. This is not an anomaly. We have hundreds of pictures like this now in our photo files. It's not raining over here on the neighbor. It's raining on the Peritas. It makes a difference. The more green you can grow, the more water you can retain in the soil, the more rain you will get and create. We'll talk about why in a little bit. We've got tons of radar evidence. This is over the Peritas. And if you look at, no, this is over the Las Damas, I think. Trying to remember where I'm at with this. But look at where the most intense rainfall is at. Right over the Las Damas Ranch, okay? Right over the Las Damas. Again here, I know these ranges here of the Las Damas, okay? The western and eastern ranges that are on the Las Damas. Look at where the most intense rainfall is falling, on the Las Damas. Again, this is the middle of the Las Damas Ranch where we are seeing the very best grass growth. Look at where the most intense rainfall is occurring by radar on the Las Damas. Again, where we're seeing all the green, where we're seeing intensive forage growth. And then this is Rancho El Refugio. Again, the ranch is right here, and you can see where the rain is forming on the ranch. And again, you look over on the right, you see its location to Big Bend State Park and all of that. And you see where the rainfall is occurring, right on the ranch. And it's not on any of the neighboring ranches. This is, again, Rancho El Refugio. And if you look at this, again, rainfall very distinctly just in the middle of their ranch and not on neighboring ranches. And another fence line comparison, different ranch, Rancho El Refugio. Look at this, where they've been getting rain on the right, on their ranch, neighbor's ranch on the left. Guys, pretty much right up to the fence line yet again. As I said, we've got hundreds of these pictures. We're working on a scientific paper on this right now that we'll be publishing this fall. And we're also going to be presenting at the 2021 Sustainable Ag Summit in Las Vegas in November. That summit, that conference is centered on resiliency, and we're going to be presenting on these very things at that conference. This is hugely impactful. It shows that we can literally change the weather in a very local way if we implement strong regenerative practices. It absolutely works. It alters weather patterns. This is also the difference that it makes. Alejandro took these temps where you've got stuff growing in the desert, 92 degrees soil temp, where the soil was bare, 152 degrees. Where do you think you got biology active? And you still got water cycle and mineral cycle. No doubt. Another quote by Masanabu. It was in an American desert that I suddenly realized that rain does not fall from the heavens, it comes from the ground. Desert formation is not due to absence of rain, but the rain ceases to fall because the vegetation has disappeared. True statement. How many of you are aware of the fact that it's microbes from the soil traveling up into the atmosphere that then the water vapor in the clouds condense around until they create enough weight to fall back to your earth? How many of you are aware that that is what creates the vast majority of the rainfall globally? Microbes from the soil traveling up into the atmosphere. There's tons of research. Google it. There are quite a few peer-reviewed articles talking about this. And this is going to be part of the paper and the presentation that we're doing. The microbial contribution to rainfall. This is why deserts stay deserts, just like Masanabu said. They don't have enough green, therefore they don't have enough microbes, microbial population, to have the critical mass needed traveling up into the atmosphere, up into the clouds to precipitate rain. So we can change this. We've now just shown that we can alter that even in the desert. So I've gone through that. I want to show you one last thing here. This is really, really impactful. This is mine reclamation in the state of Chihuahua. Now, we've also done this in the states of Illinois, Mississippi, Montana, Utah, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Mine reclamation using the livestock and adaptive grazing. So this is a strip mine in the state of Chihuahua in Mexico. That's what it looks like. Pretty sad, right? Looks terrible. Nothing there. No way you're ever going to get anything to grow there. Well, here's what we're doing. We're taking cattle under high density and small paddocks, single strand polywire, and bale grazing. So we're placing bales on this strip, the sides of this strip mine. And this is previously grazed by the cattle. So the hay's all spread out by them now. You can see the paddock that they're in, and then look on the right-hand side, the aftermath. Okay. No fertilizer other than the cow's manure and urine, no irrigation water, and no seed other than what's in the bales of hay. And this is what is occurring. So again, with these pictures, you can see how we're working them around the sides of the mine. The troughs down here are for watering the cattle. So that's how they're getting the water. And again, controlled under a single strand of polywire. And you can see the bales placed out for them to move into the next paddock. So we leave the bales intact and they're moved into the next paddock and they graze those bales and spread that hay out. Now look what happens after the cattle are moved on from previously grazed areas. Look at the tinges of green starting here. So the seed is starting to grow. And then look at the close-up. It's growing. Then look at it, continuing to grow, continuing to thrive on this strip mine. Now look at the progress. Look at the movement pattern around the entire mined area. And you can see we haven't even made it all the way around it yet, right? But look at what's already growing behind the cattle. That fast. No irrigation, no planted seed, just seed from the hay. No fertility applied other than manure and urine from the cattle. But look at the density. The cattle were under about 1 million pounds per acre on every single paddock. This is enormously powerful. This speaks to what I've been talking about all day, the incredible power of biology. That's just immense. This is bale grazing for winter forage management. Again, you can see the bales are placed about every 25 to 30 foot apart in a checkerboard fashion. We also do a lot of winter stockpile grazing. This is bale grazing in Nova Scotia. This is what we want to leave behind. So if you see on the right-hand side, we've got a lot of hay, which is new carbon, new organic matter laid down on the ground, and tons of manure and urine that the cattle just applied. So this is going to really jumpstart forage growth that next spring after winter thaw. So again, they're controlled by a single strand of polywire. We move them from row to row to row each day. And this is the aftermath that we're looking for on a properly bale grazed area. Again, an example of the aftermath that we're looking for. This is winter stockpile grazing of standing summer annuals. More bale grazed areas. This is bale grazing in Kansas. Well, this is the aftermath. This is on Shane News Farm, one of my partners, doing a side-by-side comparison. No bale grazing here, top left, bottom right, where he bale grazed. There's just 100 feet of distance between those two. So you can see a stark contrast. That's all he did. He just bale grazed one, didn't bale graze the other. He's got 3 to 4 times the forage biomass production where he bale grazed last winter versus not bale grazed. I showed you these before. And then this is at BDA farm, and this is bale grazing there. Again, this is the type of aftermath impact that we're looking for. And then I want to show you a human study here. And this is so impactful. We're participating in this very heavily. This is phytonutrient research that is being performed by Dr. Stefan Van Vliet and his team of researchers at Duke University School of Medicine. They are doing a very high level type of analysis called metabolomic analysis of all different types of foods. And what they're characterizing is more than 2,000 different nutritional spectra in these foods. This is the most comprehensive food nutritional study ever done in the history of man. Never have we looked at this many different nutritional spectra, more than 2,000 of them. And we're looking particularly at the phytonutrients in plants, in meats, in eggs, in milk, and so forth. This is ongoing research. We are participating in this. Our farm is one of the participants. Gabe Brown's farm and a number of others are participating in this trial. But here's some preliminary data for you. So looking at phytonutrient richness of meat and milk, here's what they have found. If we look over at the graph, the chart on the left-hand side of the page, comparing polyphenols or phytonutrient content in milk compared to what the cows were fed, the dairy cows were fed. You can see that if they were eating a TMR, they had the lowest phytonutrient content in the milk. Or if they were fed a ryegrass silage or hay or grassland hay, they had lower phytonutrient content. It wasn't until they were grazing pasture that it shot way up. We have a much, much richer phytonutrient content, 3 to 4 times higher phytonutrient content from cows that are actively grazing versus being on a TMR. If we look at grass-fed beef compared to grain-fed, again, the phytonutrient richness much higher in the grass-fed versus grain-fed, and they tracked days on feed and found that in a feedlot and found that the phytochemical richness decreased rather dramatically and quickly when they were on a TMR versus being on a forage-based diet. And here's the classes of phytonutrients that we're looking at, that we're analyzing. Terpenoids, phenols, carotenoids, and tocopherols. And again, there's several thousand of these that are being analyzed. Now, what about with human health? Okay, so in humans fed, grass-fed versus grain-fed for 10 weeks, they found significantly less inflammation and significantly better red blood cell function in the humans eating the grass-fed versus the grain-fed. And again here, forage-fed versus grain-fed, interleukin measurement. You want these numbers to be lower because interleukins are indicators of stress in the body, oxidative stress and inflammation in the body. Again, and on the right-hand side, grass-fed, grain-fed, the basal was pretty much equal in the two study groups. And then when they were put on their respective diets, you can see that omega-3 levels and all of that rose significantly in those eating grass-fed, and it actually decreased in those that were fed the grain-fed. So it does make a difference. And we are finding these phytonutrient profiles make a huge difference. In analyzing, I'll give you one example, ground beef. So Dr. Van Vliet and his team, in analyzing ground beef, they found that between commodity ground beef and grass-fed ground beef, there was an 85% difference in phytonutrient profile in favor of the grass-fed. And the grass-fed beef was from a ranch that had a highly diverse plant population. So the animals were eating a highly diverse diet. If you're grass finishing and it's a monoculture or low diversity, it won't be that magnitude of a difference. Okay, so the way you finish absolutely makes a difference. Diversity makes a difference. So that means that the grass-fed beef finished on the highly diverse pasture had 85% more nutrient density in it than the commodity feedlot beef did. That's pretty staggering. We're doing this on dairy products, eggs, vegetable products, fruit products, meats, all of that. Once this data becomes public knowledge, it's going to create what I think is a very, very big difference in the way consumers view their food. And they'll no longer want generic foods. They will want to know a lot more about how their foods were grown, how they were raised, and that phytonutrient profile in those foods. There's a lot more that we could cover, but I want to take a lot of time for questions and answer and discussion. And we also, again, Friday, we're going to have a live in-field session. So for anybody that can participate in that, I encourage you to do so, because we're going to be digging a lot deeper relative to the things that I presented today. And you're going to get to witness in person how this works and why it works. So, Felicia, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. At this time, we definitely going to go into Q&A. I would like to bring up our co-worker, Kara. She's part of the Soil and Water, and she wanted to speak on that project for a few minutes. Kara, can you come up?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for giving me the floor here for a second. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay, great. I am going to talk about Soil for Water, which is a program that we have going on at NCAT. So basically, Soil for Water is an initiative to catch and hold more rainwater in our soils. And we started it in Texas back in 2015. And we are expanding now, which I'm going to tell you a little bit more about. So our focus is to create a critical mass of landowners who are applying regenerative agriculture practices that are improving soil health and the water cycle. So all of the things that you just saw Dr. Williams speak about is what we are attempting to help people facilitate on their own pieces of property and in their operations. So we're working with a lot of different partners and acting as a facilitator. And we have a network, and we provide a lot of educational resources to this expanding web of partners and producers that are interested in this mission as well. So we started in 2011 because of the drought that was in Texas that caused $7 billion in losses just in the agricultural industry alone in Texas, and 3.5 billion of those were from livestock losses. And so Peggy Sechrist, who's an HMI certified educator there in the picture, came to NCAT and brought this project to us. And so since 2015, we've been working on helping promote the Soil for Water program. And we have just recently started a peer-to-peer network that I'm going to share a little bit more about with you. And that network is being funded by the NRCS Conservation Collaboration Grant that we've recently attained, as well as a Southern SARE grant that we will be receiving here really soon as well. So we started out with just 15 different regenerative agriculture trials that we have going on 15 different ranches around here. And while we're no longer in Central Texas, and while we're no longer doing the monitoring for people, we do help people learn how to conduct their own trials on their properties. So I'm going to give my email address at the end here. And if you all would like information on learning how to conduct research on your own properties, we can help. And it doesn't even have to be really intense regenerative ag trials. It can be simply just monitoring more like citizen science to help you understand if your practices are working or not. So please hit me up if I can help with that. But also to learn more about the trials that we have going on these 15 different ranches, you can visit soilforwater.org and go to our trials page to see what some of these are. But this original group of 15 landowners was the start of our network. And we brought these members together to talk about the changes that they were seeing happen on their land through different regenerative ag trials, through the trials and experiments that they were doing on their land. And they began to converse and share information. And it really helped them to learn and make changes in their operation. So this is us working on a ranch up in Canadian Texas, where we do a number of different things, such as looking at percent cover data. We do soil testing, looking at microbes and nutrients. We also look at species, richness, and diversity, and a lot of different things like that. We collaborate with the NRCS on this. And so we're helping producers understand whether their practices are really making a difference. And it's a really fun project to work on. So as I mentioned, these are some of the things that we look at. And if you are interested in doing some of these things yourself, we can help you learn how to do those. We can have one-on-one consultations. We have a lot of different specialists at NCAT who can help walk you through this and learn how you can make a difference on your land. We also do a lot of educational outreach. Obviously, this is one of those that we're doing. This is not a Soil for Water event, but Soil for Water does a lot of events like this. And we have a couple coming up in September that if you go to our website, soilforwater.org, and go to our events page, you'll see some of those different events we have coming up. And these are some of the topics that we speak on, as well as others. So if there's a topic you're wanting to learn about, we'd love to hear what you have to say and take that into consideration and try to help with getting you the information that you need to capture and hold more water in your soil. So I want to talk a little bit more. We have started a livestock producer peer-to-peer network in a number of states. So we have 8 different states that we are working with right now. So the eligible states are Texas, Colorado, New Mexico, California, Montana, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Virginia. Our plan is to expand and become available to all states in the near future, but right now we're starting small just so we can get our legs under us. And these are the states that we have funding to do this in. And so ultimately, in this network, we know that producers learn best from other producers. And so we're trying to facilitate communication and information sharing amongst those folks. And you can, if you're in one of those states and you're a livestock producer, you can visit soilforwater.org and go to the network enrollment page and join. There's a number of benefits that those members get, but you can see other members who are in your area on a map that we have on a members only page. We also have discussion forums and discounts on Pasture Map. You actually can receive about $100 discount on Pasture Map, which is a grazing application, grazing planning application. We also have discounts for Regen Ag Lab for soil testing. And we also offer specific events that are just for members. So if you are not a livestock producer and you would still like to keep in touch with what's going on with Soil for Water, org and sign up for our mailing list. And eventually we are going to be rolling other states into the network, as well as making networks that are specific for farmers as well, or for farmers who also want to do crop grazing too. So please stay in touch with us either by joining the network if you're a livestock producer and live in one of those states, or you can just sign up for our mailing list and learn about the different events that we have coming up, and also the network expansion into the future. This is an event that we have coming up on September 20th with Dee Dee Pursehouse, and we're going to be talking about landscapes that work for all of life and how we can grow community climate resilience by regenerating the soil sponge. And so this is one event that's open to all, and we also have a series of events that's open to just network members that is going to follow this one. And so if you want to join the network to become a part of the rest of the series, please go online and join. And if you are not a livestock producer, you can please join us for this event, and by going to soilforwater.org/events and seeing what we have going on there. So I want to make sure Alan has plenty of time to answer your questions. So that was just a quick overview of Soil for Water. But if you're wanting to learn more, please visit our website, or feel free to email me directly if I can be of assistance to you in helping design a monitoring program, or also just providing different publications and podcasts and tools that NCAT has available for learning about capturing and holding more rainwater in your soil. So thank you very much, Felicia, for giving me that space to do this.
You're quite welcome, and thank you for sharing this awesome program. Dr. Williams, we can get started with our Q&A.
You bet. Do you have some questions queued up, or? Not sure where we are here. Let me try to scroll through here a little bit.
So I'm going to start from the bottom and go up. We had,
okay.
It's a statement and a question. So I had some mouse barley get established after bale grazing. My goats will eat everything else to the ground before they eat it. I have been using a propane torch to burn it, but is there another way to control the mouse barley?
So very good question. You know, oftentimes after bale grazing or any other impact like that, you're going to have some things that come up that you think may not be very favorable. Typically, we don't worry about that, to be quite honest with you. Now, I'm not sure if, looks like Doug is asking this question. Not sure if Doug is has cattle as well, but if he also has cattle to go along with the goats, then a little bit of higher density graze on that is an excellent way to control it and to be able to allow other things to outcompete it. Mainly what you're looking at here, Doug, is being able to outcompete it, not necessarily get rid of it, but just to outcompete it. And so, you know, that can be a number of ways. Again, that can be not worrying about it very much and let your goats, you know, continue to graze. But, you know, when I'm not sure what you mean by the goats eat everything else to the ground before they eat it. If that's the case, then they're favoring the mouse barley, because now it's what's left there and what's most vigorous. So if that happened, you need to remove the goats before that happens, and there's still plenty of other things still growing there so that they can begin to outcompete it. But again, if you have cattle, then cattle are an excellent way going there under higher density and use that.
So Dr. William, Mr. Doug said he just have goats and their cash crop is redwood trees.
Okay. Yeah. So again, the main thing is don't let the goats graze it down too much. Leave plenty of residual from the other plants that are growing there, and they will begin to outcompete the mouse barley.
Okay. And Katie is asking, what about forages that are toxic to cows? We have a section of pasture that has a significant amount of nightshade.
Okay, so a handful of things that you can do here, Katie. Now, as you increase diversity, toxic plants become far less of a problem because they no longer make up the majority of a mix. And so you may have nightshade, you may have pyrrolament, you may have a number of other things in there that can be toxic. But yet, if they're just part of a broader mix, then you're going to have very little issues. However, because you say that you have a significant amount of nightshade in this pasture, that's telling me that in this particular pasture or in that section of the pasture, that the nightshade is dominant and there's not a lot of other things growing there at this point in time. So at this point in time, you're going to have to avoid it, and if they're trained to polywire, it's easy to just fence them out of those areas. But what you can do, these are great areas. Again, nightshade, pyrrolament, all of these other things in the wintertime, those are great areas to bale graze on. So drop bales of hay down there and bale graze them on those areas, and so that next spring, you stimulated a lot of other plants to grow up and outcompete the pyrrolament, the nightshade, whatever may be there.
Great. So my coworker and I was asking the same type of question. How can the cows live on the desert? Are they nutritionally sound? Even though it is 300 acres per one cow, but I'm assuming they are nutritionally sound.
Oh yes, well, you can't let them starve. Then you've got nothing. And if you looked at Alejandro's numbers, remember, he's increased his cow numbers 2.5 times. And you don't do that by letting cattle starve. So what happens here is that, again, you stay at the same stocking rate, but the typical rancher, what do? So if they're needing 200 up to 300 acres per cow, what are they doing there? Well, they're just letting the cattle just roam across the entire ranch, right?
Yes.
And go wherever they want to go.
Mm-hmm.
So what we do is we find every ranch, even in that area, as you saw from my pictures, has some biological hotspots. So we take that mob of cattle and we group them. And instead of letting them just roam all over the ranch at will, we group them up under much higher density and move them into and through those biological hotspots under much higher density. So they're getting the nutrition they need. And we've also used some bale grazing to go along with this in the desert to create biological hotspots and to further spread the biology. And what you want to do is you want to find prior biological hotspots and then go just to the edge of those to start your bale grazing and bale graze there. And you can bale graze in the summer as well. You don't have to wait in winter to bale graze to build biology. You can do it in the summer. So the cattle were very sound nutritionally, and as a matter of fact, look far better than any of the neighboring ranches' cattle, far, far better.
Gotcha. So I'm sticking a question in here for small farmers, 5 to 10 acres. With bale grazing, I'm assuming we could use square bales and just space them out.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. You would just, so a typical round bale, we would put, 25 to 30 foot apart in checkerboard fashion. But if you're using small squares, and if you notice in the mining pictures, we use the big squares, right? If y'all saw those on the strip mine pictures, but on if you're using or feeding small squares, then what you can do there is you would just place them a lot closer together. They would be more in the neighborhood of 5 to 8 feet apart. But it will be the same philosophy, the livestock moving through them, controlling them by polywire. And you don't want them eating all the hay. That hay is new carbon, new organic matter, new fertility for the soil. So you really want to place them so that they're only going to eat about 50% of the hay that you place out, and the other 50% is going to be trampled and spread out. That's the goal. So when you're turning them into bales of hay every day to meet their nutritional needs, you have to account for that they're going to eat about 50% of the bale and spread the other 50% out.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question from Faith. Was the research recorded of these 4 farms done over 1 year?
No, that was a multi-year study. It was either 4 or 5 years that they were collecting that data. Yeah. All
right. So I'm assuming, and I don't know if this is coming from NOP, but we have 76FR 205.205 must implement a rotation, including cover crops. And so I don't know, I'm assuming that maybe, and Mr. Eric, you may have to just add more to that for explanation. But that may be coming from our NOP program, but could you add more to that so we could get more context of that? One statement, and this again is from an NCAT a co-worker, is that we really can create our own drought by mismanagement.
That's exactly how the Chihuahuan Desert was created, through mismanagement.
Wow. All right, let's see. All right, so we just got the first real moisture of the year in mid-August in Montana. As plants respond, do we follow the principles of spring grazing even though it's nearly autumn? And how about when should we back off on grazing in fall to set up for a spring regrowth after drought?
Yes, and that's a very good question. I have been in Montana quite a bit this year, as well as all of the surrounding states. And as a matter of fact, I'm headed back to Montana next week for a couple of weeks. So we're doing a lot of work up there. And I've noticed that throughout the state, there's some areas that are doing better than others. There's some areas that are really hit hard by the drought and others that are just a little better. They've had more moisture. But yes, the answer to that is treat it as exactly as you would beginning spring grazing. It's critical now, especially since you've had this drought all year and you're just now getting moisture. If you go in that and let your cattle graze that hard, or sheep or goats, whatever you have, you are going to set yourself back really hard for next year. So you need to graze it very sparingly, leave plenty of residual and root growth heading into the winter so that you're setting yourself up very well for next spring. And hopefully you'll have more moisture over the winter, maybe more snowpack, and start off next spring a little better here from a moisture standpoint than you did this year. But absolutely protect it and do not let them overgraze it.
Okay, last question in the chat. Why 6 inches, and can you do the same thing just using a can as long as you are consistent, and that's the water infiltration?
Yes, so the reason for that, again, 6 inches long and 6 inches in diameter, is because you can take a single bottle of water, 444 mils, like the standard bottle of bottled water that you would buy, and you carry those to the field and pour that bottle of water in there. And at 6 inch diameter, that's going to simulate 1 inch of rainfall. So that was all calibrated out. And that's why we use the 6 inch by 6 inch rings, is because of the calibrations that allow us to be able to. Now, could you use a can or something else? Yeah, but you would have to recalibrate, to make sure that you're getting an accurate measure there.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. We appreciate it. Now, before we leave everyone, we need you to do one more poll. And if you can, I'm getting ready to put it up. I'm launching it right now. And we ask if you can fill that out before we close out for today. And we appreciate everyone joining us today. This has been a wonderful, wonderful treasure, just listening to this information. And so I know we're going to have a treat on Friday because we have received so much information today. So please be looking out also for the recording when this will get uploaded on our site as well. And Dr. Williams, while everyone is filling out this poll, any closing remarks and comments, we will be glad to have them at this time.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. You know, this takes everybody learning together. I mean, we're still learning ourselves. We learn something every day, and we love interacting with others in this learning process. This is a journey, not a destination. Just remember that. And if you treat it as such, you'll enjoy it immensely, and you'll make tons of progress. There's a whole host of, you know, there's a lot of different areas that you can get help and so forth. Again, on our own websites, please feel free to utilize those, understandingag.com and soilhealthacademy.org. We've got a host of really good materials there, and we're continuing to add to it. And there's many others on the thread today that also have excellent learning material that they can share with you as well. So thank you, all of you. I deeply appreciate it. Look forward to seeing many of you on Friday.